My mother-in-law grabbed my passport and set it on fire. I watched as it burned quickly and turned into ashes. Now you can't go to St. Bart's Island for your vacation, she said. What? Why would you? I stammered. You're not going anywhere, you'll stay here, she added with a smirk. I looked at her and my husband, both of them were smiling like they had won something. I felt completely humiliated. How could they treat me like this? Deep down, I had suspected they were up to something, but I never imagined it would be this cruel. Their smug looks and creepy giggles made me feel sick. But I wasn't going to let them have the last word. It was time to tell them the truth. My name is Tyra, and I'm 29 years old. I studied linguistics in college, and after graduation, I began exploring the world, learning about different languages and cultures, and sharing that knowledge with others. I work for an organization that sends me abroad for months at a time to participate in various projects. Because of this, I never thought I'd get married. But at 26, when I returned to my home country, I met Corey. He later became my husband. Our relationship wasn't typical. Because of my job, I would only see him for a few months before traveling again. During those times apart, we stayed connected through phone calls and emails. After 2 years, we got married when I was 28, but even after the wedding, my job didn't change. I still spent half the year abroad. I appreciated Corey for marrying me, despite my career. Today, I'm finally on my way home after 5 months abroad. Even though I should be tired from the flight, I feel excited to see Corey. My steps are light, and I'm walking quickly. When I got home, Corey wasn't there yet. The house was a mess, so I started cleaning. I had told him so many times to keep the house tidy, but it was always like this. Usually, I'd argue with him about it, but today I let it slide. I was just happy to be home and about to see him again. While cooking dinner, I heard the front door open. I rushed over to the living room. Corey, you're home. I missed you, I said, smiling. Oh, hey, Tyra, you're back. That was today, huh? He replied casually. Really? Is that all you have to say? I asked, disappointed. We haven't seen each other in 5 months. Yeah, but I'm used to it by now. This is normal for us, he said, shrugging. What? Can't you at least say you missed me? He sighed. I'm tired. Is dinner ready? I held back my frustration and said, yeah, it's ready. Let's eat. I had imagined dinner with Corey would feel special since it had been months since we last ate together, but it felt off. Why do you keep looking at your phone? I finally asked. What's wrong with that? He snapped. I just got home. Corey, you haven't even talked to me properly. You're glued to your phone, I said, trying to stay calm. We've been talking through phones and emails for months. There's nothing new to say, he replied, sounding annoyed. But it's been so long since we've actually seen each other, I said, my voice rising in frustration. That seemed to push him over the edge. He stood up, slammed his phone on the table, and glared at me angrily. You know what? You've been on a plane, but I'm the one tired from work. Got it? Corey snapped. I frowned. Hold on. I came straight from work to the airport, too. Don't talk to me like that. I didn't ask you to do that, he said coldly. You came rushing home on your own. What? Do you have to say it like that? I missed you, Corey. Well, I didn't ask you to come back. If you're going to act like this, don't come back at all. You're so annoying, Tyra. He slammed the table, got up, and stormed out without even touching the dinner I'd made. I sat there, stunned. What's wrong with him? Why is he being so cold? I haven't seen him in so long. Was I the only one happy to be reunited? What was the point of hurrying back if this was how he'd treat me? Tears rolled down my face and dripped onto the table. The next morning, Corey's attitude was still the same. When I said, "Good morning," he just gave me a cold look and said, "You know, I envy you." What do you mean? I asked, confused. You get to sit around at home while you're here. Must be nice. That's not true. I have plenty to do, like writing reports, preparing materials, and getting ready for the next training session. There's a lot more work than you think. Yeah, but it's all stuff you can do at home. I wish I had a cushy job like that. Must be nice to be you. Hey, you don't have to say it like that. Whatever, I'm just a regular guy with a 9-to-5 job, so I have to actually work. You just get to relax here, princess. Excuse me, Corey, that's not fair. But before I could finish, he walked out the door, leaving me standing there, speechless. Before we got married, Corey and I had some arguments, but he had never been this sarcastic or cold. His recent behavior left me feeling confused and unsure of what to do. I wondered if I was doing something wrong or if there was a way to fix things. While taking a break from reading work materials, I decided to clean the house. I vacuumed the rooms and changed the bedding when my phone suddenly rang. The screen showed my mother-in-law's name. A bad feeling crept over me as I picked up the call. "Hello, this is Tyra," I said. "Tyra, long time no see," she said with fake cheerfulness. "I heard you came back yesterday." "Yes, I did. And I heard you upset Corey. He's quite angry, you know." "That's really between us," I replied, trying to stay polite. "Well," she continued, ignoring me, "since you're back, I thought we could take a trip with the whole family." "What?" I blurted out, caught off guard. "Oh, yes, my husband and I were planning a vacation to St. Bart's Island, and Corey said he wanted to come with us. It's perfect." "What? That doesn't." "So, Tyra, since you're so used to traveling abroad, you can help us with booking the hotels and flights, right?" "Me? Or are you saying you can't handle a simple request from your mother-in-law?" Her tone grew colder. I knew what this was. She didn't want to travel with me. She just wanted to use me because I was experienced with planning trips. My mother-in-law had disliked me from the beginning. Ever since our wedding reception, she'd been sarcastic and critical. Over the years, she sent me nasty messages while I worked abroad. "How can you call yourself a wife when you're gone for months at a time? If you can't take care of your home, my son should marry someone else. It was a mistake to let him marry you." I had never expected kindness from her, but now I was being roped into managing a family vacation. I hated how I couldn't say no, even though I knew I was being taken advantage of. Later that evening, Corey came home from work. He seemed in a much better mood than before. Throwing his briefcase on the sofa, he grinned and said, "Mom called you, didn't she? We're all going to St. Bart's." "Yeah, she told me," I said hesitantly, But what? Why don't you just go with your parents like you originally planned?" I suggested. Corey's cheerful expression immediately darkened. He clicked his tongue in annoyance and glared at me. "You need to get it through your head, Tyra," he said sharply. "The only time you're actually useful to us is when we're traveling abroad." "That's not fair. You don't have to speak to me like that," I said, frustrated. "But it's true, isn't it? Anyway, you're going to book the flights and accommodations, and, of course, everything will be under my name." "Wait, so are you paying for the trip?" I asked. "Are you kidding? We'll split it 50-50. It's the least you can do to show respect to my parents," he said dismissively. "What does that even mean? If you've got time to sit around the house, you've got time to make the reservations. Get it done," he said harshly, grabbing a beer from the fridge. I wanted to protest, but I was too scared of the consequences. Feeling ashamed and powerless, I gave in and booked the flights and accommodations for the family trip, just as Corey and his mother had demanded. On the day of the trip, I drove to my in-laws' house to pick them up so we could head to the airport. A few days before the trip, I couldn't sleep well. In the middle of the night, I woke up and noticed that Corey wasn't in bed beside me. I went into the living room and overheard him on the phone. "Mom, it's all okay. I'll be there in the morning like we planned. Just take care of the passport thing. I'm looking forward to it. I'll introduce her to you when I get back." His words made me uneasy. Passport and introducing her made me wonder what he was talking about. The fact that he called her mom told me it was definitely my mother-in-law on the phone. It seemed like there was something going on between them that I didn't know about. And the fact that they had asked me to come on this trip in the first place didn't sit right. What were they planning? I didn't know the full picture, but I knew I needed to be careful. The day of the trip arrived. I grabbed my carry-on and handbag, which Corey had asked me to pack, and we drove to my in-laws' house. When we arrived, my mother-in-law greeted us with a smug smile. "Hey, Tyra, you're here. It's been a while. We're almost ready. I'm just grabbing a few last-minute things, so please wait a little longer." "Okay, no problem. By the way, Tyra, could you bring the carry-on from the other room? It's heavy, so Corey can help you with it." "Sure." As I went to grab the case, I noticed my husband and mother-in-law exchange a knowing look. I kept my passport in my pocket, just in case. At Corey's request, I brought the case into the living room. That's when I saw my mother-in-law holding my passport with a smug grin on her face. Now you can't go on the trip to St. Bart's, she said. What do you mean? I asked, confused. I'm going to burn this passport right now, she replied. What did you just say? I demanded. I was just using you to make the trip arrangements, she said coldly. The reveal. What the hell are you doing? I asked as my mother-in-law set my passport on fire. You're staying here, too bad, she said with a smirk. She burned the passport, watching it turn to ashes in the sink. When it was done, she turned to me, grinning. We did it. Corey jumped in with excitement. Yeah, Mom, we made it. No, it's just the three of us on this trip. We'll meet Corey's new girlfriend when we get back, right? Yeah, Corey said. I've already set it up. We don't need you anymore. Proudly, my mother-in-law added, when something's not working, you fix it. Corey then pulled out his phone and showed me pictures of the woman he'd been having an affair with. Looking at me smugly, he said, I'm not divorcing you for my reputation, but you're staying here while we go. When we return, I'll move in with her, and you can leave. His words were cruel, but they only made me more certain I didn't deserve to be a part of their family anymore. I smiled and said, by the way, whose passport was that? What? Of course, it's yours. I took it from your handbag. My passport? I'm so sorry, I said sarcastically, but my passport is right here. What? No. My mother-in-law's face turned pale as I showed her my passport. She had assumed she'd burned mine, but it turned out to be Corey's passport. Wait, whose passport did I burn then? She asked, panicking. I guess it was my husband's, I said casually. That means, it was your son's passport you burned. My mother-in-law turned pale as Corey yelled at her. Mom, what did you do? I told you to be careful, she argued. There was only one passport in her handbag. How was I supposed to know? They started fighting, blaming each other, and I was disgusted by the scene. Hey, Tyra, do something, Corey yelled at me. I snapped back. Seriously? You cheated on me, and you're telling me what to do? You and your mother are disgusting. Before they could argue more, my father-in-law came downstairs. What's going on here? He asked. I explained everything, and he was furious. The trip was cancelled, and my mother-in-law was divorced. My husband was disowned by his father and banned from returning home. I consulted a lawyer, divorced Corey, and demanded alimony from both him and my ex-mother-in-law. They had to pay everything up front, and since they didn't have the money, they had to borrow it. Now, my ex-husband lives with his mother and struggles to make ends meet. The woman he had an affair with dumped him too. As for me, I moved out with the alimony money, rented a condo, and enjoy living alone. I went through a lot because of cheating and bullying, but now I'm free and happy. I still travel, explore new cultures, and share my experiences with the world. Thank you for reading to the end. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed this story. See you next time.
After my father suddenly passed away from an unexpected illness, leaving behind a staggering $2 million debt, my mother and brother Tom took matters into their own hands. They decided how to handle my father's inheritance without consulting me, leaving me to bear the brunt of the debt. My frustration with them reached a boiling point, but the thought of their future struggles made me smirk inwardly. I'm Nancy, a 24-year-old single woman working as a nursery teacher at a daycare. I graduated from a junior college and have always lived at home with my father, mother, and my brother Tom, who is close to my age. Since childhood, Tom and I haven't gotten along. A graduate of a prestigious university, Tom looked down on me for my junior college education. His arrogance was matched by his frequent mockery of my modest personality and average looks. With your plain appearance and lack of impressive credentials, who would ever want to date you? He would sneer. In reality, I do have a boyfriend, but I keep this a secret to avoid provoking Tom's scorn. Though Tom's sarcasm used to sting, those days are long behind me. I now take great pride in my work as a nursery teacher, finding immense joy in interacting with children and watching them grow. Tom's words no longer faze me. My mother, who reveres Tom for his prestigious university degree, constantly boasts about him to relatives and neighbors. In stark contrast, I was often treated as an afterthought. It was clear that my mother favored Tom and showered him with preferential treatment. Unlike her, my father always had my back. Whenever my mother gave snacks exclusively to Tom, my father would secretly share the same treats with me. He would proudly express his admiration for my choice to become a nursery teacher, and I deeply cherished his supportive gestures and words. My father was the CEO of a small company where Tom also worked. Unfortunately, the company's financial situation had been deteriorating recently. Despite my father's relentless efforts to cut the deficit and his late nights at the office, Tom remained indifferent. "I can't work for a company run by someone who looks so evenly poor," Tom said, resigning from the company to take a position elsewhere. Since her marriage, my mother had stopped working and fully dedicated herself to managing the household. With no experience in supporting my father's business, she didn't grasp the challenges he faced. Despite witnessing his daily struggles, she criticized him for the company's lack of success. "The company is still struggling. If you don't resolve the deficit soon, I won't be able to buy that new bag from the magazine. Honestly, what are you doing every day? You're completely useless," my mother said. She had an insatiable appetite for spending, especially on luxury items, often making impulsive purchases. Her dismissive attitude toward my father, as if she couldn't see the value of his hard work, filled me with outrage. Though I'm no business expert, I've witnessed my father's tireless efforts from a young age and understand how challenging it is to manage a business. My mother, who has been with him for years, should recognize this as well. I couldn't fathom why she would blame him as though he were incompetent. One day, my frustration boiled over, and I confronted my mother, demanding she stop belittling my father. Her response was dismissive and condescending. "Why should I be scolded by someone like you? People without an education should keep their opinions to themselves. Don't speak on things you don't understand," she retorted. Tom, seemingly influenced by my mother's attitude, joined in and criticized me harshly. It was clear that despite sharing the same blood, our values and personalities were worlds apart. "Nancy, don't let their words affect you. Education doesn't define your worth. Take pride in your role as a nursery teacher. That's what truly matters," my father said. His words of encouragement warmed my heart and bolstered my resolve. Even though part of me wanted to stand up to Tom and felt overshadowed by him, my father's support made me feel fearless. As long as he was by my side, I knew I could face anything. An unexpected event shattered my world. "Father," I was horrified to learn that my father had collapsed at work. The company staff who reached out to me said he was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Without hesitation, I dashed to the hospital, only to find that my mother and brother were nowhere to be seen. "I'm too busy to leave. You'll have to handle Dad's care," my mother said. I was stunned by her response. How could she claim to be too busy when my father's life was at stake? As a jobless person, surely she had more flexibility than I did. What could possibly be more important than being there for my father? In disbelief, I took care of the hospital formalities and listened to the doctor's grim news. My father had acute heart failure and only had a few days left. I visited him as often as I could, hoping to see his smile once more. A few days after his collapse, as if sensing my presence, he briefly regained consciousness while I held his hand. "Dad, I'm so relieved to see you. Do you recognize me? Can you hear my voice?" I pleaded desperately, but he looked at me with a distant, vacant stare before quietly closing his eyes, never to open them again. Until my father passed away, neither my mother nor Tom made any effort to visit him. They only appeared just before the funeral, clearly reluctant to oversee the arrangements. During our conversation there, it became apparent that my father's company had gone bankrupt, leaving behind a $2 million debt. "Inheritances come with debts," my mother said, her tone dripping with disdain. As the funeral proceeded, both she and Tom began to blame my father for the situation. "He was unreliable in life, and now he's left us with this burden. What a curse," they complained. "What are we supposed to do about all this debt?" my mother wondered aloud. "I have a suggestion," Tom said with a smirk, turning his gaze toward me. "Since Dad had such a soft spot for you, why don't you inherit everything? You can also take on the debt. It's only fair to repay the love you received from him," my mother added, her voice carrying a sense of cold expectation. Unbelievably, my mother and Tom were trying to offload both my father's inheritance and his debts onto me. Despite my father's passing, they were more concerned with their own interests than with mourning his loss. They had always belittled and ridiculed both my father and me, seeing us merely as tools for their gain. However, I had a plan in reserve, something my father had asked me to use if anything happened to him. It was time to put it into action. I decided to keep my true intentions hidden and reluctantly agreed to their demands, all while secretly preparing to execute my plan. Understood. I will take on the entire estate, including the debt. My easy acquiescence surprised both my mother and Tom, considering I was assuming a $2 million debt. They probably anticipated more resistance from me, but their satisfaction in offloading the burden onto me seemed to eclipse any surprise. They looked at me with a mix of triumph and condescension. "So, you're actually going to pay off all the debt. We appreciate that. It's lucky for us, even if I don't quite understand your thinking. You really are quite naive, though. I suppose that's to be expected given your limited education," Tom said. My mother and Tom ultimately relinquished their claims to my father's estate. With no other relatives to contest the inheritance, I was the sole beneficiary. After my father's death, I moved out of the home I no longer wished to live in and began a new chapter on my own. It was then that I discreetly set my plan into motion. Several months after my father's passing, one day, "What on earth is this?" Tom, who I hadn't seen in a while, appeared visibly enraged, his face reddening as if he was on the verge of lashing out. His fury was likely triggered by seeing me emerge from a mansion that could only be described as extravagant. Why is Nancy, who supposedly inherited $2 million in debt and has such a low social status, living in a house like this? It was clear that this was the question Tom and my mother would be asking. "Seeing your astonished faces is quite the reunion after so long. I'm glad to see you're doing well," I responded. "Who do you think you are? Making jokes with no education. I want to know what's going on," Tom snapped. "This is where I live. Is it really so surprising to see me coming out of my own home?" Tom, growing increasingly agitated, advanced toward me. However, as a nursery teacher accustomed to lifting children daily, I had developed more strength than the average woman. Tom, who led a sedentary lifestyle and avoided exercise, was comparatively weak. I swiftly overpowered him and had him on the ground in no time. He looked utterly bewildered. As Tom lay on the ground and my mother rushed to his side, I smiled and began to explain. "The reason I'm living here is because of the decision you both made to relinquish Dad's inheritance. Before he passed away, my father had been quietly building wealth through real estate to secure our future. Despite the company's debt, the market value of the properties increased significantly after I inherited the estate. I sold them at the right time, and even after accounting for inheritance taxes, the profit from the real estate exceeded $5 million. My father had anticipated this rise in value, which is why I took on the inheritance, despite the debt. Instead of using the proceeds to pay off the $2 million debt immediately, I first ensured that the employees of my father's company were fairly compensated. Additionally, I received a life insurance payout of $3 million. The amount was truly staggering. Wait a minute, life insurance is usually paid out to the spouse, right? My mother interjected. It appears Dad changed the beneficiary to me, I explained. He had informed me of this while he was still alive. My father was deeply troubled by your harsh words and excessive spending. To ensure that his life insurance money was used wisely, he trusted me to manage it and change the beneficiary. I have a dream that I've kept to myself, one to support and nurture children facing economic hardships. With the funds from my father's estate and the life insurance payout, I built a large house that could easily be called a mansion. While continuing my work as a nursery teacher, I am also applying the real estate investment skills I learned from my father to steadily grow my assets. After explaining everything, my mother and Tom were enraged, their voices rising in anger. "This is absurd. Why didn't you tell us something so crucial? If we had known about the real estate, we never would have let you inherit it." I responded firmly. "Dad anticipated that you would react exactly like this if he knew. That's why he kept it a secret, to prevent you from claiming everything. I didn't expect you to respond just as he predicted, but it seems he was right. What are you talking about? Regardless, we deserve our share of the inheritance. We have a right to it." I was taken aback by my mother's audacious demand for a portion of the assets. It was clear that when it came to money, people reveal their true nature. My mother and Tom were showing their cowardice and arrogance, just as I had always known them to be. "You both forfeited that right when you renounced the inheritance. It's not possible to reclaim it now. I cannot hand over the hard-earned assets my father accumulated to people who are consumed by their own greed." The ignorant, uneducated one just won't stop whining. "Quit your nagging and hand it over now," Tom shouted. Despite their continued baseless complaints, I had no choice but to call security to have them removed. They left quietly after being escorted out. In the following days, security footage showed them loitering near my house. trying to find a way to claim my father's inheritance. Their persistence was unsettling. Using the footage, I reported them to the police as suspicious individuals. After that, I no longer saw my mother or Tom around my home. After some time had passed, I learned about my mother and Tom's situation from a family friend who had been close to us for years. Tom had found a new job, but his self-centered attitude quickly earned him a poor reputation. Within less than a year, he had alienated his boss and was relegated to menial desk work, a far cry from the special treatment he had enjoyed as the president's son at my father's company. Eventually, the harsh work environment took its toll, and he left the job. His tarnished reputation made it challenging for him to find new employment within the industry. "Why aren't you working? Stop lazing around," my mother would admonish. "It's not like I'm just sitting around doing nothing," Tom would retort. "What kind of effort are you putting in, you useless, unemployed person?" my mother would criticize. After witnessing Tom's failure, her attitude toward him changed drastically. Once doting on him, she now blamed him for his incompetence and joblessness, growing increasingly cold and distant. The shift in my mother's behavior placed immense psychological pressure on Tom, eventually leading him to become a recluse. Having relied on my father's income for years and never having developed the skills or inclination to work, my mother now faces financial struggles alongside Tom. Both are struggling to make ends meet. As for me, I am happily married to the man I had been dating, and we now live in the large house I own. My husband shares my passion for helping children in economic need. Together, we are working towards this dream by setting up the necessary facilities and obtaining the required qualifications. I hold deep gratitude for my irreplaceable father, and with my husband by my side, I am living a fulfilling and purposeful life.
"Isn't today the anniversary of your marriage with Dad? I've got something for you," Chloe said, her voice biting as she handed me the envelope. I could see the disdain in her eyes. I took the envelope, my heart heavy but steady. I opened it and saw the neatly arranged divorce papers, Tony's signature glaring back at me. "You're really sure about this? What goes around comes around," I warned, locking eyes with my daughter and making sure my voice didn't waver. She shrugged, her indifference stinging more than any words could. "It's for the best," she replied. Tony stood behind her, his arms crossed and a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. His once charming artist demeanor had devolved into something much darker over the years, something that made me question the man I'd fallen for more than 2 decades ago. 25 years, I muttered, shaking my head. What happened to for better or worse? Tony didn't flinch. "Things change, Caroline. People change." I held up the papers, my fingers gripping the edges. "These cost more than just good times. They cost trust, respect, and the life we built. You really want to dismantle all that for this?" Chloe leaned against the doorframe, twirling a strand of her perfectly styled hair. "Dad deserves happiness, too." "At my expense?" I shot back. I felt a rising anger that tasted of betrayal. "Don't think I've been ignorant of your little escapades." Tony's eyes flickered, but Chloe interrupted before he could respond. "If you can't handle this, maybe you never really knew us." I stepped closer, my gaze drilling into Tony's. "Where does this leave you? Running off with Raquel and starting fresh? Don't forget where the roof over your head comes from." "You should have thought about that while you buried yourself in work," Tony spat. I laughed bitterly. "Someone had to pay the bills when your art wasn't exactly selling off the shelves." Chloe's expression hardened. "Honestly, Mom, get over it. Sign the papers and stop being so dramatic." I folded the papers carefully, putting them back into the envelope. "This isn't over," I said, voice steady now. "It's far from over." I turned around, leaving them in the living room, their victory short-lived. As soon as I was out of sight, I let myself breathe. Years of dedication and sacrifice narrowed down to this moment felt like a bad joke. But if they thought I'd roll over so easily, they were wrong. I heard Tony's voice, low and mocking. "She'll sign them. She always follows the rules." Chloe responded, "Yeah, let her have her moment. We'll carry on just fine without her." As I climbed the stairs, I made a mental note to call Detective Parker. It was time to put my plans in motion. They may have delivered the first blow, but I was prepared for war. This family facade had crumbled, but I wasn't going down with it. What goes around truly does come around, and I was about to make sure they learned that the hard way. Years ago, I had met Tony at a gallery opening in Soho. I was young, ambitious, fresh out of law school, and he was the magnetic center of the room, an artist with dreams larger than his means. He had charmed me instantly. The way he talked about his paintings, his visions, it was intoxicating. We married quickly and passionately. The first few years were full of laughter and love. Even when we struggled financially, I never doubted our bond. Tony would paint all day while I climbed the legal ladder, working grueling hours to support both our dreams. When Chloe was born, I hoped she would complete our little family. "Caroline, we've got a good thing," Tony used to say, pulling me into a kiss as Chloe played inside her crib. "Just you watch, my big break is coming." But that break never came. Instead, I found myself taking on more cases, working longer hours. Tony's optimism turned into frustration, and his frustration often exploded into arguments about money, time, and priorities. "I need to make something of myself," he'd insist while staring at a half-finished canvas. "I can't be stuck at home all day." "And I can't keep carrying this family alone," I'd retort, the exhaustion heavy in my voice. As Chloe grew, she seemed to inherit Tony's sense of entitlement without a lick of his artistic ambition. By the time she was a teenager, she demanded the kind of lifestyle we simply couldn't afford. Shopping sprees, fancy gadgets, luxury vacations, each request felt like another nail in the coffin of my overburdened bank account. "Mom, everyone's going to Paris for spring break. I can't be the only one not going," Chloe whined one evening. "Chloe, we can't afford it," I replied firmly. "Maybe next year." "You always say that," she snapped before slamming her bedroom door. Tony, instead of backing me up, would often undermine my efforts. "Just let her go, Caroline. We can figure something out." "Figure out what, Tony? How to stretch an already overdrawn bank account?" I'd shoot back. Then there were the credit card statements. At first, they were minor, easily overlooked, a meal here, a shopping trip there. But then, the charges started mounting. Expensive dinners, lodging at upscale hotels, all under Tony's name. One evening, I couldn't take it any longer. "Tony, we need to talk about these charges on the credit card." He barely looked up from his canvas. "So talk. What's Raquel's boutique, and why are there $1,000 charges there?" He finally turned to me, irritation flashing in his eyes. "I bought some things for Chloe. Why do you care so much? You've got the money." "I care because it's reckless. We can barely make ends meet as it is." Tony threw down his paintbrush, splattering red paint everywhere. "God, Caroline, you're such a buzzkill. Maybe if you weren't always working, you'd understand. It's my work that keeps this family afloat, Tony." The conversation ended with silence and a tense standoff. From there, things only got worse. The distances between us grew, not just financially but emotionally. Tony and Chloe became closer, a clique of their own, leaving me to hold together the fragments of what was once a loving household. Looking back, it's clear now. The seeds of betrayal were planted long ago, watered by my hard work and Tony's dissatisfaction. But little did they know, I had begun preparing for the storm they were brewing. The demands of my job were relentless. I spent most days in the office and nights poring over case files at home. The firm required as much of my time as they could get, and I willingly gave it, thinking it would secure our future. But each hour at work meant another hour away from a home that was slowly falling apart. One evening, I stumbled upon another credit card statement riddled with lavish expenses. "Chloe!" I yelled, holding the paper up as she walked into the kitchen. She barely glanced at me, busy texting on her phone. "What? Care to explain this bill? You spent $2,000 at some designer store last week." She rolled her eyes. "Relax, Mom. It's just some clothes." $2,000 on clothes, Chloe? Really?" Tony walked in, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" I waved the statement at him. "Have you seen this? Chloe's spending is out of control." Tony took the paper, looked at it briefly, and shrugged. "She's a teenager, Caroline. Let her enjoy her life." "This isn't just enjoying life, Tony. This is irresponsible." Chloe scoffed. You just love playing the martyr, don't you, Mom? Always acting like you're the only one who matters." "It's called responsibility, Chloe. Something you'd know nothing about." I retorted, my patience wearing thin. Tony flung the paper onto the counter. If it bothers you so much, why didn't you just come to me? We could sort it out together. Oh, like you've been so helpful, I replied sarcastically. Maybe if you spent less time indulging her and more time supporting the family, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Maybe if you weren't such a control freak, Tony snapped back, we wouldn't feel the need to escape from your rules. It wasn't the first time he'd thrown my dedication to work back in my face, but it stung every time. I'm doing what's necessary to keep this family afloat. Meanwhile, I'm trying to give our daughter the life she deserves, he shouted, cutting me off. Chloe smirked, enjoying the rift her actions had caused. Face it, Mom, you're losing control. I glared at both of them, feeling the divide grow wider by the second. I turned and walked away, needing to clear my head. I pulled my phone out, dialing Detective Parker's number. It was time to find out just how deep Tony's betrayal went. The next few weeks were a blur of work and covert meetings with Parker. The detective was thorough, handing over photos, receipts, and logs detailing Tony's outings with Rick Reckel. The evidence was enough to make my blood boil. During one of our sessions, Parker handed me a thick file. This includes everything, Mrs. Smith. Photos, transaction records, even witness statements. I took the file, feeling its weight. Thank you, Parker. This will be very useful. Returning home, I found Tony and Chloe in the living room, laughing over some show. Their carefree attitudes were like salt in a wound. I watched them from the doorway, the file clenched in my hand. The betrayal seemed even more grotesque when masked by their masquerade of normalcy. For now, I'd play along, letting their complacency be my advantage. But the time was fast approaching when I'd lay my cards on the table. They thought they could walk all over me without consequence. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Months passed, filled with uneasy tension and feigned normalcy. At work, I was my usual self, efficient, focused, a pillar of strength. At home, however, I moved like a ghost, observing but detached, preparing for the storm I knew was coming. One night, while Tony and Chloe were out, I met Detective Parker at a quiet cafe. He laid out an envelope filled with new evidence. You might want to brace yourself for this, he warned. Inside were photos of Tony with Raquel, not just at luxury spots but with Chloe accompanying them. Shopping sprees, dinners, even vacations. My money funding their escapades. How could he involve Chloe in all of this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the betrayal cutting deeper with each new revelation. He's using her to shield the affair, Parker said, shaking his head. By making her complicit, he's trying to justify his actions. But don't worry, Mrs. Smith, we have everything we need to expose him. I nodded, determination hardening my resolve. Good, let's proceed. Returning home, I found Tony alone, pouring himself a drink. He looked up, surprise flashing in his eyes for a moment before settling into indifference. What are you doing home so early? Just wrapping things up at work, I replied, my voice steady. Where's Chloe? Out with friends, he said dismissively. I nodded, moving to sit across from him. Tony, we need to talk. He took a sip of his drink, studying me. About what? About us. About where this is heading, he laughed bitterly. Do we have to do this now, Caroline? Yes, I insisted, my eyes locked onto his. I want to know why. Why her? Why involve Chloe? He sighed, setting his glass down. You left me no choice. You were always working, always absent. I needed something more. And you thought you'd find that by betraying me? By turning our daughter against me? My voice rose, unable to contain the flood of emotions any longer. You act like you're a saint, he spat. But you're cold, distant. You never cared about what I wanted, about what Chloe needed. Anger surged within me. I cared enough to work myself to the bone to give you both a good life. I cared enough to overlook your shortcomings, to support your dreams even when they drained our resources. And this is how you repay me? Repay? You always made it clear it was your money, your success, he countered. There was never any us in your world, Caroline. I shook my head, feeling the weight of his words but refusing to let them break me. You think you're the victim here? You think dragging Chloe into your mess absolves you? He stood up, swaying ever so slightly. Think what you want, Caroline, but you're not blameless in this mess. You're right, I said quietly, standing up to match his height. I am to blame, for trusting you, for believing in you, but that ends now. I turned and walked away, leaving him to his self-pity. Upstairs, I locked myself in my room, the sounds of Tony's ranting a distant echo. I pulled out the evidence provided by Parker, spreading it across my desk. This was just the beginning. Tony and Chloe had made me feel small, insignificant, but they underestimated my resolve. They thought they could manipulate and discard me. They were gravely mistaken. The confrontation was coming, and I was ready. Retribution would be swift and thorough. Everything that went around was about to come crashing back down on them. This war was far from over, and I was prepared to fight tooth and nail for every inch of my dignity and justice. I spent the next several weeks quietly gathering my evidence, preparing myself for the battle ahead. The house, once a place of warmth, now felt like enemy territory. Tony and Chloe carried on with their lives, oblivious to the storm brewing right under their noses. One evening, Tony came home late, his steps unsteady. "Hey, Caroline," he slurred, trying to act normal. "Where's dinner?" I glanced up from my paperwork, keeping my composure. "There's some leftovers in the fridge." He stumbled to the kitchen, muttering under his breath. "Whatever. I'm not hungry anyway." Chloe barged in shortly after. "Mom, I need some money. My friends and I are going out this weekend." I stared at her, the nerve of her request adding fuel to my simmering anger. "No, not this time, Chloe." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Ah, you're so unfair. Dad would give it to me." "Well, your dad can't keep spending what we don't have," I shot back. Tony re-entered the room, his expression dark. "What's this about, Caroline? Chloe wants more money for her latest outing, and I'm saying no. Can't you cut her some slack? She's young, let her have fun." "Fun? Our financial situation is anything but fun, Tony. We need to be responsible," Tony scoffed. "Of course you'd say that. Always the buzzkill." Chloe jumped in. "Why are you even bringing this up now? We were fine before." "Before what, Chloe?" I demanded. "Before you started using me as your personal ATM? Before you and your father decided to make a mockery of this family?" Tony shook his head, chuckling bitterly. "Look at yourself, Caroline. You're so obsessed with control, you're suffocating us." "Suffocating?" I stood up, my voice rising with each word. "You think trying to keep this family financially afloat is suffocating? While you squander everything on your own selfish desires?" Chloe narrowed her eyes at me. "This is your fault, you know. If you weren't so busy trying to be perfect at work, maybe you'd notice what's going on at home." I laughed, but it was humorless and cold. "Oh, I've noticed plenty, more than you both realize." Tony glared at me, sensing the shift. "What are you talking about?" I reached for the file on the desk, pulling out the thick stack of evidence Parker had gathered. "You think running around with Raquel, using Chloe as your cover, went unnoticed? You think I didn't see through your lies and betrayal?" Both their faces dropped. Neither had expected me to confront them so directly. Tony's composure cracked first. "You had me followed?" "I had to." "You left me no choice," I replied, throwing the file onto the table. "These are just the highlights of your indiscretions. Receipts, photos, witness statements. It's all here." Chloe, for once, was silent, her bravado evaporating. Tony, however, looked furious. "How dare you?" "No, Tony, how dare you? How dare you betray me and think you'd get away with it?" The tension in the room was palpable, each word slicing through the facade they had maintained for so long. "Get out of my sight, both of you," I demanded, voice breaking with emotion. "I don't want to see either of you right now." Tony and Chloe left, their outrage mixed with fear. They had underestimated me, and now they knew it. I returned to my preparations, knowing the time for retribution was near. They thought they were clever, that they could keep me in the dark and manipulate everything to their advantage. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. This battle was mine to win, and I was ready for every strike they could muster. I woke up on the morning of our anniversary with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Today was the day I would confront Tony and Chloe head-on what should have been a celebration of our union, but had turned into a bitter reminder of deceit. I found them in the kitchen, already aligned like a united front. Tony looked up from his coffee, a smug expression crossing his face. "Morning, Caroline." "Morning," I replied tersely, my gaze icy. Chloe joined him at the table, a knowing smirk on her face. "Happy anniversary, Mom. Happy indeed," I said, pulling out a carefully prepared folder from my bag. "Let's get right to it, shall we?" Tony eyed the folder warily. "What's that?" proof of your betrayal, I said, throwing the folder on the table. Everything you did behind my back, the affair, the extravagant spending, using Chloe as a cover. Chloe's smirk vanished. What? Read it and weep, I snapped, pointing at the folder. Tony opened it, flipping through the damning pages. His face changed from confusion to anger. You hired a PI? I did what I had to. This marriage, this family was hanging by a thread, and you were too busy indulging yourself to care. Chloe grabbed the folder and started skimming through the documents. You spied on us? On your own family? This so-called family betrayed me, I shot back. You think you can play games with me and get away with it? Tony slammed the folder shut. You always have to control everything. I had to control everything because you let everything fall apart, I shouted, my voice echoing in the kitchen. Us, it's over, Tony. His face twisted in rage. Don't think you can just walk away from this. I can and I will, I said steadily. But not without taking what's mine. He laughed bitterly. You think you can just take everything? I've already taken steps to protect my assets, I replied coldly. I've set up my own accounts, pulled my investments out of our shared ventures, and contacted a lawyer. You won't be getting a penny more than you're entitled to. Chloe looked horrified. You're tearing this family apart. No, Chloe, I corrected her, my tone dripping with disdain. You and your father tore this family apart the moment you decided his affair was more important than our unity. Tony's face turned red. This isn't over, Caroline. We'll fight you on this. Good luck with that, I said, my voice like steel. Every move from now on will be scrutinized. Every transaction, every lie, every betrayal. You're going to face consequences for every single one. Tony stormed out of the kitchen, and Chloe followed, her bravado shattered. I was left standing there, feeling a mix of liberation and sadness. This was not how I envisioned our marriage to end, but it was necessary. I walked over to the window, taking a deep breath. The house had become a battleground for lies and deceit, but today marked the beginning of the end. I was stepping out of the shadows of betrayal and into the light of justice. From this point on, Tony and Chloe would know the true meaning of accountability. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for my dignity, my assets, and my peace. What goes around comes around, and it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of legal meetings and packing. I had finally found an apartment downtown, close to the firm. It wasn't much, but it was mine, free from the echoes of betrayal and deceit. Tony was relentless, calling and trying to bargain. Caroline, we can work this out. Just come home, let's talk. No, Tony, we're beyond talking, I replied, my voice unwavering. This is happening. Accept it. He would swing between anger and desperation. You'll regret this. You're breaking up our family for what? Revenge? Not revenge. Justice. You made your choices. Now live with the consequences. One evening, as I was boxing up my things, Chloe stormed into my office. You really think you can just walk away and leave us in ruins? I looked at her, feeling a pang of sorrow mixed with resolve. I have done everything I could for this family. Your father and you made your choices. You're so full of yourself, she spat. You think you're the victim here? I let out a sigh. I'm moving out tomorrow, Chloe. I hope one day you understand why. You'll see, Mom. You'll come crawling back. I shook my head, sadness seeping in. Goodbye, Chloe. The next morning, I moved my belongings to the new apartment. It was a small one-bedroom place, but it was a fresh start. It felt strange and liberating. Later that day, my lawyer and I filed the divorce papers. I had anticipated Tony's reaction, and soon enough, he was at my new place, banging on the door. Caroline, open up, he shouted. I opened the door to face him, standing firm. What do you want, Tony? You think this is the end? You can't just leave like this. I already have, I said, my voice calm but resolute. It's over, Tony. It's not over until I say it's over, he yelled, his rage spilling over. I held up my hand. This is over the moment you sign those papers. Until then, you're just making it worse for yourself. You never did care, did you? He sneered. All you cared about was your career, your image. I felt my anger rise, but kept my cool. I cared enough to keep this family going when you abandoned your responsibilities. This is the consequence of your choices, not mine. Tony glared at me one last time before turning and walking away, his threat still hanging in the air. I closed the door, feeling both the sting of the encounter and the relief of its finality. In the following weeks, I focused on reclaiming my life. The legal battle was tough, but with each passing day, I felt stronger. The firm supported me, my colleagues rallied around, and I found solace in my work once more. Tony's desperation turned into petty tactics, but my lawyer was fierce, countering every move he made. Finally, after relentless negotiations and court sessions, the divorce was finalized. I sat in my new living room, sipping wine and looking out at the city. The battle was behind me. The scars were still there, but I had survived. Rebuilding my life piece by piece, I knew the worst was over. Tony and Chloe were left to face the reality they had created. They had thought they could mislead and manipulate me without facing the music. But now, they knew. The house, the pretense, the illusions all crumbled. I wasn't just free. I was stronger, clearer, and ready for whatever came next. They had underestimated me, and now as the dust settled, they were the ones left to deal with the wreckage. A year later, I could hardly recognize the woman I had become. The bruises from the past had healed, leaving me with a sense of peace and self-assurance I hadn't felt in years. Work was thriving. After the divorce, I threw myself into my career with a newfound vigor. I had taken on high-profile cases, successfully closing deals that put our firm on the map. Colleagues looked to me for advice. My reputation as a top-tier attorney was cemented. My new apartment, though modest, was a sanctuary. Every corner held something that represented my indomitable spirit. Pictures of friends, a few art pieces I bought for myself, and a new rescue dog, Max, who had become my constant companion. One evening, while finishing up a case file, my phone rang. It was Chloe. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Mom, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice shaking. "What is it, Chloe?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Dad's... things aren't good. He's broke, and Raquel left him. We're losing the house," she confessed, her bravado completely gone. I sighed, the anger I once felt shifting into something softer, but not weak. "Chloe, your father made his choices. You both did." "We didn't know it would end up like this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Actions have consequences," I replied. "I've spent years cleaning up after your messes. I'm not coming back to do it again." "Please, Mom," she pleaded. "I'm desperate." I hesitated, the maternal instinct urging me to protect her, but I knew this was a lesson she had to learn. "Chloe, you need to figure things out for yourself. I won't always be here to rescue you." There was a long silence on the other end, then a muffled sob. "I screwed up, didn't I?" "Yes, you did," I said softly. "But now you have a chance to make it right, to start fresh. Learn from this." The conversation ended, and I felt a strange sense of closure. I had done what I could, but the rest was up to them. Later that night, I took Max for a walk along the river, the cool breeze a reminder of how far I had come. The reflections of city lights danced on the water, a mosaic of possibilities. Returning home, I poured myself a glass of wine, settling into my favorite chair. The legal papers, the hurtful words, the lies, they were all behind me now. I opened a book, reading a few pages before setting it down and closing my eyes. Every choice I had made led me here, to this moment of quiet contentment. I no longer felt the weight of betrayal, but instead, a powerful sense of resilience and clarity. The phone calls from Tony dwindled to nothing. The legal battles finally settled. Chloe's desperate reach out was the last vestige of a past I had severed. They had to navigate the consequences of their actions on their own. As I pet Max, feeling his warm presence grounding me, I knew I had truly moved on. Life had dealt its cards, and I had played mine with strength and integrity. What's more, I had a future to look forward to, a future built on my terms, free from the shackles of deceit and treachery. I smiled, savoring the hard-earned solitude. The world outside kept spinning, but here, in my sanctuary, I was finally at peace. The drama and revenge gave way to the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed and a spirit unbroken.
The move is finally complete, yet Charles, my father-in-law, utters his disdain without bothering to address me by name. His usual arrogance is unmistakable, and though he doesn't explicitly call me out, it's evident he's directing his words at me. I've endured his attitude until now, but I've reached my limit. As I paused from wiping the table, I shoot a defiant glare at Charles, who doesn't even bother to meet my gaze. "I'll be out by today," I declare, and Charles responds with a mocking laugh, reveling in his satisfaction. His words cut deep, branding me as a mere parasite and trash. He envisions a life refreshed once I'm gone, oblivious to the profound changes his own lifestyle has undergone over the years. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Grace, and I recently turned 40. I'm married to William and currently residing with my in-laws. Despite several years of marriage, we remain childless, and there's no intention or possibility of having children. The harsh truth about William's infertility surfaced shortly after our marriage registration. Had I known from the start, I might have reconsidered our union. The revelation struck me like a pit of despair. All our dreams of building a happy family together were shattered. William, with apparent sincerity, had discussed our future children, even contributing to naming them. Little did I know, it was all a facade, a betrayal concealed beneath the guise of a promising future. Despite the profound disappointment, divorce wasn't a simple option for me. We had committed to being a family with the in-laws, who we considered our parents. Reporting a divorce a day after joining the family felt like a breach of trust. Living with the in-laws only intensified the inevitable question of when we would have children. Upon revealing our infertility, the in-laws reacted with fury. To them, a woman unable to bear children was deemed useless and deserving of immediate expulsion. Charles, my father-in-law, took the lead in treating me as a servant, stripping away any semblance of dignity. In their house, I was perpetually relegated to eating alone in the kitchen. I became part of the leftover disposal crew once the in-laws and William had finished their meals. No matter how much effort I put into cooking delicious food, all I received were the scraps left behind by them. Since getting married, I hadn't enjoyed a single satisfying meal. My weight steadily dropped, and within 6 months of marriage, my wrist bones were protruding. Initially, mother-in-law Madison bore the brunt of Charles's tirades, but once I joined the family, his focus shifted to me. Madison seemed relieved by the change. She smiled more often. William once remarked that she felt relieved not to be Charles' target anymore. Despite never smiling around Charles, Madison's demeanor improved in his absence. Charles's tyranny extended beyond targeting me. Upon learning of our infertility, he commanded me to work from dawn to dusk, deeming me lacking as a woman. I had always intended to work after marriage and had no desire to prolong my stay in their house unnecessarily. Balancing early morning chores, seeing everyone off, and heading to work proved challenging, but having a job with flexible hours helped. Despite my efforts, Charles discarded my food without tasting it, citing its appearance as the reason. Neither William nor Madison complained, choosing instead to remain silent. Despite my grievances, conversations during meals were sparse, and I often wondered if they truly enjoyed eating in silence. I had no choice but to maintain a facade of harmony with the in-laws, playing the role of a dutiful wife. As someone without parents, the weight of divorce seemed unbearable. However, Charles's demand that I contribute all my earnings to the household expenses crossed the line. While I intended to contribute, his insistence on full control over my earnings felt absurd. Protesting was futile. Charles's decisions were absolute. It seemed easier to comply, appeasing him and sparing myself the sight of Madison and William's saddened expressions. The root of the marital issues lay with Charles, whose oppression and torment overshadowed everything else. While Madison used to manage the household finances, the responsibility fell on me after marriage, a task I found overwhelming. "Isn't this too much for Grace?" Madison dared to question, only to be silenced by Charles's authoritative command to shut up. I had been dismissed in Charles's eyes, and Madison and I, as women, were deemed worthless, stripped of the privilege to voice our opinions. Taking over the household ledger from Madison initially shocked me, but after several years, I grew accustomed to it. Perhaps the acceptance stemmed from having an additional breadwinner in the house. Charles, however, began spending more recklessly. justifying it as work-related expenses, increasing his nights out, and embarking on trips with Madison and William, excluding me. This sudden change in their behavior marked a departure from the past. Despite the years that had passed, Charles continued to treat me as an outsider, labeling me a parasite or trash. In my younger years, I endured the peace that came when Charles wasn't home, not minding my role as a mere housekeeper. However, as I approached 40, I found his behavior intolerable. The fear that once kept me silent waned, and I started speaking up. Charles didn't appreciate my newfound assertiveness, leading to resentment and a worsening negative loop. Our strained relationship reached a point where Charles constantly badmouthed me, and our interactions were minimal. Whenever he spoke, it was to insult me, creating a dreadful atmosphere at home. Despite the escalating tension, I refused to comply when Charles demanded I leave the house. I snapped back, questioning where I could go knowing I had no parents. Charles, fueled by anger, slammed glasses onto the table, breaking them in the process. Tired of enduring the constant yelling, I deviated from my usual apology and spoke sharply to Charles. I pointed out that he should calm down in his older age. Unaccustomed to such defiance, Charles became furious, asserting his dominance as the master of the house, declaring that a wife like me shouldn't have opinions. Frustration reached its peak, and I confronted Charles head-on, expressing my years-long desire to be treated like a human. He retaliated, escalating to grabbing me by the collar and vehemently declaring that a person like me wasn't needed in his house. The force of his words was enough to shake the furniture, and in that moment, I was pushed away. I should have offered an apology right then and there, but I could no longer contain my frustration. "Fine, you want me to leave. That'll make you happy, right, Charles?" I looked up at him, unable to stay silent any longer. "Yes," he spat out, condescendingly looking down on me. "Then I'll do it," I declared. He stormed off to his room with a loud noise, and I, now a bit calmer, started cleaning the living room that Charles had dirtied. Madison came to check on me with a worried look, but she left without saying anything, returning to her room. I felt like I had no place in this house anymore. Neither William nor Madison would protect me, and years of endurance exploded, making me feel even more isolated. The next day, as usual, I got up early and began my routine. Charles woke up and entered the living room, sitting on the sofa, leaning back and spreading the newspaper without even glancing at me. Then, without looking up, he asked, "Finished moving yet?" There was no way I could have moved out so soon after yesterday's events. I didn't even think he was serious. I thought it was just a drunken outburst, not something he meant. This was about leaving the house, right? "When will you leave? You have no right to live here anymore," Charles said, still not looking at me. I stopped wiping the table and turned to face him. If he was serious about wanting me to leave, then I would respond seriously. "I'll be out by today," I declared. Madison, who was listening nearby, froze, her worried gaze falling on me. It was clear that once I left, Charles would target Madison again, and she didn't want me to go. However, Charles insisted on my departure, and I had no other option. Charles laughed loudly, likely satisfied that he was getting his way. I rushed out of the living room, quickly packed my things, and left the in-laws' house. I hadn't decided where to go, but I felt liberated. I sent a message to William, who was already out, asking him to divorce me. A lawyer would contact him, and then I turned off my phone. Over the next few days, I found a lawyer and had them contact William and the in-laws. Charles, thinking divorce was inevitable, pressured William into signing the papers quickly. Despite William's reluctance, he signed the agreement under Charles's glare. I signed in front of the lawyer, and the divorce was finalized. We completed the distribution of property, and I was able to claim a settlement for Charles's harassment, which I had recorded. It was worth paying for a lawyer instead of fighting alone. Charles, concerned about his public image, avoided any complications by involving lawyers. Knowing exactly how much money Charles had from managing the household finances, I suggested an amount he could just about afford. With the property distribution and harassment settlement paid in full, I started a comfortable life in my own apartment. I used to hate being alone before marriage, but after living with the in-laws and getting divorced, I embraced the newfound freedom. I've grown to appreciate the solitude of my own time, cooking meals for myself. I relish the tranquility without anyone raising complaints. About 3 months after the divorce, Charles persistently calls, and though I assume it's nothing positive, I choose not to answer. However, a momentary lapse results in me accidentally picking up. "What have you done to my house?" Charles's voice booms through the phone. Instinctively, I move the device away from my ear to endure the loud onslaught. I respond, "I haven't done anything. I left the house as you instructed." Charles remains unsatisfied, continuing to yell. He's upset about notifications regarding issues with withdrawals, blaming me for the problem. I calmly assert that I didn't alter anything and adhered to his instructions, managing and paying everything due. As the realization of why Charles is angry dawns on me, a grin widens on my face. I'm glad he's not here to witness it. Charles, incredulous, questions the financial aspects, asking how much I earned. I recall never revealing my salary details to him. $45,000 take home. I respond. Charles reacts with a sound akin to a squashed frog before falling silent. In truth, my job in sales at an investment trust company involved a commission-based salary, influenced by the returns generated for investors. Unfortunately, much of it vanished due to Charles' extravagant spending. However, I had wisely invested the inheritance from my parents, bringing in some income. Although not substantial, it covered living expenses. During the property distribution, only William's savings were considered since my parents' inheritance and its earnings were not part of it. Charles, insistent, questions whether the standard of living before marriage was the same. As I press on, he begins to get angrier. In the midst of his tirade, I couldn't help but laugh at his absurd demand. With Charles yelling to keep contributing money to the house, I retort, "You're the one who ruined it. Why should I, no longer a family member, give you money?" I chuckle half-heartedly, and amidst my laughter, I heard something shatter on the other end. Another one of Charles's tantrums. The realization that I no longer had to clean up after his outbursts made me almost wish he would break more. We were strangers now, no longer family or anything remotely close. I urged him not to act like family and advised him to manage his own finances, leaving him just enough to get by. With that, I bid him goodbye and ended the call. I anticipated more calls, but none came. I thought maybe he was remorseful, but it became apparent that wasn't the case. Perhaps he felt ashamed for not being able to make payments and resorted to ordering William and Madison to borrow money from financial institutions, plunging them into further debt. While payments were made, their unwillingness to change their lifestyle perpetuated the cycle of accumulating more debt each month. I learned about this when William pathetically contacted me, even expressing a desire for reconciliation. Furthermore, William proposed cutting ties with Dad and getting back together. However, such a suggestion seemed hypocritical coming from someone who never stood up for me against Charles' harassment. Despite choosing to stay with William, knowing we couldn't have children, he never protected me. Returning to him was not on my agenda. Charles might have felt suffocated, but that was no longer my concern. I wish they understood the consequences of their actions and endured the suffering now. The in-laws struggled with debt, yet they couldn't bring themselves to reduce their lifestyle standards. Charles, now a contract worker with a reduced salary, joined Madison and William in part-time security jobs. It wasn't just Charles, it was also Madison and William, persisting in maintaining their living standards despite being at their limits. I used to be desperate to protect William, but now I lived for myself. At 40, having children might be challenging, but I remained open to the possibility. Before the divorce, waking up felt like a chore, but now I woke up feeling refreshed, eagerly anticipating a better future in my new life. After not seeing him for a month, John just thrust a divorce lawyer's business card at me without even asking, "Are you okay? Or how are you feeling divorcing a wife who doesn't work? Pay me $1,000 a month as alimony. Sounds good. Take care." John chuckled as he said this, standing beside him. Emily was wrapping her arm around his, wearing a similar smug expression. "Fine, let's divorce then." I said it so casually that John seemed a bit surprised, but he quickly shared his smile with Emily. Good thing John isn't much of a thinker. It makes my plan easier to execute. After the divorce papers got approved, I decided to start my revenge plan on both of them. I will make them cry as a celebration of my recovery. My name is Sarah Wolf. I'm a 47-year-old illustrator. I'd also work as a children's book author. I just love drawing. I have 2 childhood friends, John and Emily. They're important friends to me, and John is also my husband. It all started when John asked me out as I was heading to a different college after high school. I was surprised. I thought he was into Emily, but I couldn't say no to a confession from John, whom I had secretly liked. After some thought and consultation with Emily, I accepted John's proposal. Emily's behavior had been a bit problematic since teens, but she was still a dear friend to both John and me. However, Emily had a tendency to snatch other people's boyfriends and then dump them once they became obsessed with her, causing problems time and again. Her parents were concerned, so John and I often spent time with her to watch over her. John and I got married when we were 25, 4 years later. Emily brought her fiancé into our lives. His name was George, a professional working for a top-tier company. Nice to meet you, Sarah and John. I've heard so much about you. Looking forward to our future together. George was very polite, and we all got along immediately. We would get together during holidays and vacations, taking trips or going on long train rides to enjoy some drinks. However, things started falling apart after Emily got pregnant 2 years into her marriage. John and I originally had many siblings, so there was no worry about an heir. So we decided we didn't need children. Both of us loved kids, but weren't keen on actively caring for them. Besides, we loved our freedom to travel and enjoy drinks. We often found it heartwarming to see families with children, but it was never more or less than that. When Emily announced her pregnancy, John's attitude started to change. He quit smoking because Emily said she couldn't stand the smell, and even offered to drive her to doctor's appointments using his vacation days. I warned him, "George might get upset if you're always with Emily." But John argued back, "You have work, don't you? She's our childhood friend, and she's reaching out for help. You're heartless." I said, "I've been buying things and helping where I can, but going with her to the obstetrician is crossing the line." When I said that, John frowned, and then he glared at me. "Why?" "Because Emily wants it, right? She says she's anxious about the checkup. I can't just let her go alone if she's anxious. All the more reason for George to go with her, right? If you go with her every time, it's almost like you're the father of the baby in her belly. John jealous? You're not going to get pregnant anyway, so what's the problem?" He didn't take my concerns seriously, and instead started to snap, saying I was being annoying. We had hardly ever had a fight during our marriage, but things changed when Emily got pregnant. Our arguments increased, and that didn't change even after Emily gave birth. In fact, John started spending even more time with Emily and their child, Emma. But when Emma was 6, an incident occurred. It had to do with the attendees of Emma's graduation ceremonies. The day before the graduation, John suddenly started rummaging through the closet. "John, what are you doing? Have a meeting tomorrow." John's workplace had a casual dress code, but there was a rule to wear a suit during client meetings, so he always kept a few suits ready. But they were all thrown on the bed now. No, just trying to decide what to wear for the graduation ceremony. "What? You're seriously thinking of attending the graduation?" "Yeah, George can't make it. Emily asked me." "Wait, that's absurd. No matter how you look at it, I inadvertently raised my voice in denial. Immediately, John's face turned sour. I knew he occasionally picked Emma up from kindergarten, and I had done so myself when asked, yet it was nonsensical for a childhood friend who wasn't even a biological parent to attend a graduation ceremony. What? You still doubt me and Emily? I'm disappointed that you can't even help out. That's not the point. Point anyway. I'm attending the graduation tomorrow, so iron a shirt properly. John said that and abruptly ended the conversation, leaving me behind and going to the bedroom. I had no choice but to call Emily. Hello, Emily. About tomorrow. Sorry about tomorrow. I'm borrowing John. But won't George be upset about the graduation attendance, Sarah? What are you talking about? Obviously, I haven't told George that the graduation is tomorrow. I'll tell him after the ceremony. I was shocked to learn that George didn't know about the graduation schedule. Upon further questioning, it seemed that Emily hadn't informed George about any of the kindergarten events so far, and John had been acting as the father at the kindergarten, which made me dizzy with its selfishness. Wait a minute, Emily. Isn't that extremely unreasonable? It's disrespectful to George, and just because he's a childhood friend, eh? What's wrong? Sarah, you're scary. Well, see you tomorrow. Wait, Emily. I was trembling with anger at Emily, who unilaterally hung up the phone. Still, in the end, I ironed a shirt, prepared a tie, and the next morning saw John off to Emma's graduation ceremony. Since then, Emily and John started going out more frequently, from once a month to once a week, and then to 3 times a week. Eventually, even George seemed to have some suspicions, and one day, while John and Emily were out, he visited our house alone. I'm sorry for visiting you late at night. There's something that's been bothering me. Is it about the 2 of them? Yes, I would like you to take a look at this. George showed me the GPS history he had installed in Emily's car. It showed that she had been staying at a hotel 3 times a week. All of those days, she was out with John, and just by looking at George's face, I understood what that meant. What do you want to do, George? I want to take revenge on those 2. Me too. I can't forgive them for betraying us after all this time. We started planning our revenge on them secretly. First, I started by increasing my income because I had been saving by doing housework and taking care of Emma. My income had drastically decreased. George switched to working from home. And when Emily and John would go out, he would bring Emma to my house, and we would take care of her together. Neither Emily nor John realized that we knew about their relationship, and we were able to gather solid evidence. Once we had collected enough evidence and were ready to take our revenge, we discovered a shocking truth about Emma. George and I struggled with the decision, but we both agreed that we didn't want to hurt young Emma, so we decided to wait until she was an adult to take our revenge. However, even though we decided to endure for 10 years, I was struck with a serious illness. I needed long-term hospitalization, and even at best, I wouldn't be discharged for at least 2 years. Although I could work from the hospital room, it was certain that I would have to reduce my workload. After informing George about the situation, I consulted John. However, John's reaction was no different from when we were making small talk. I'll visit you once in a while. I felt that John no longer had any affection for me, as he didn't even ask about my condition or the name of the disease. In reality, John only visited once a month or once every 2 months, and after Emma's 15th birthday, she started acting strangely. Although she used to visit me almost every day right after I was hospitalized, she became distant after her 15th birthday. However, neither George nor I could figure out why, and we were puzzled. Even when we asked Emma, she just said, "Don't worry about it." However, we ended up learning the reason from John, who rarely showed up. Hey, it's been a while. Yeah, it has. John, who had completely transformed into a flashy appearance, walked in without even knocking. After not seeing him for a month, John just thrust a divorce lawyer's business card at me without even asking. Are you okay? Or how are you feeling divorcing a wife who doesn't work? Pay me $1,000 a month as alimony. That's the deal. So take care, John said, grinning from ear to ear. Beside him, Emily wrapped her arms around John's with a similar expression on her face. Fine, let's divorce then, I casually agreed, which seemed to surprise John for a moment. But he quickly exchanged smiles with Emily. It was good that John wasn't the type to think too deeply. That's why my plan worked so well. After receiving a notification that the divorce was finalized from John, I decided to start my revenge plan against the two of them. I will make them cry as a celebration of my recovery. I promptly started to take action. First, I contacted George to transfer hospitals. Then I informed my lawyer that they would be mediating between the two parties from now on. George also began to act at the same time. He moved near my new hospital with Emma, and he started to visit me frequently. Emma still had a gloomy expression, but I was happy that she came to see me every day. Most of my belongings were already in the hospital room. So I told John to dispose of the rest. I didn't want to bring anything that the two of them might have touched into my new life. Once the hospital transfer and George and Emma's move settled down, I received a call from John. I had only left my seat for a few minutes, but my smartphone already showed 30 missed calls. I answered the phone, feeling exasperated. What? Hey, what the hell is going on? I could hear the voice of a troubled real estate agent behind John's panicked voice. I also heard Emily yelling, which made me feel sick. What do you mean? What's going on? It's obviously about the house. Why do we have to move out? John shouted at me as if it wasn't his fault at all. I replied to him coolly, obviously because that's my house. John seemed to have completely forgotten. But the truth was the house we lived in was a room I rented as a workspace. When I started to make a living as a freelancer, at that time, I didn't have enough income to maintain two houses, and John didn't have enough income to live alone. So he ended up moving into my place. Therefore, Jan had never paid the rent or utility bills for that room. Although I received some money from him for living expenses, it wasn't enough to maintain the place. Unfortunately, that room was already canceled. It was far from the hospital I transferred to, so I had processed the cancellation the day after submitting the divorce papers. I didn't inform him because the real estate agent who knew the situation said they would contact him. George and Emma suddenly disappeared, and our house was sold. What are we going to do about our new house? I don't know. Maybe stay in a business hotel for now. As I turned on the speaker and started working, John yelled in frustration, "Don't screw with me." However, he seemed to remember something and started speaking in a more soothing tone. Well, whatever. When will you transfer the money? We're running low on cash. What are you talking about? Don't mess around. I told you to pay $1,000, didn't I? Oh, I don't recall agreeing to that. My nonchalant response was met with incoherent screaming from John on the other end of the phone. Apparently, he thought he could get money from me and had been squandering it. Even if he had $1,000 left, how did he plan to get by for the rest of the month? Hey, don't just stay silent. Say something. There's really nothing to talk about. My retort left John momentarily dumbfounded, but he soon started yelling again, growing increasingly annoyed. I addressed John in as cheerful a tone as I could muster. Anyway, we're basically strangers now, so please don't contact me anymore. You'll hear from my lawyer. Lawyer? Hey, wait a minute. I hung up without listening to John's response. He tried calling back several times, but I ignored it, and eventually the calls stopped. However, angry that I didn't answer, John started ignoring calls from my lawyer. He certainly had a childish side, but I never imagined he'd be the kind of person who didn't mind causing trouble for others. I sighed deeply at John's selfishness. A few months later, after a temporary discharge from the hospital, I visited John's parents' house. In front of me were John and Emily, both looking small and trembling. You telling my parents is a low blow. Oh, I just reported that we got divorced. Jan glared at me in response to my answer, but he shrank back under his father's stern gaze. Actually, I had a great relationship with my in-laws, even visiting and dining with them when John wasn't around. Despite being so well-loved, I felt it was wrong not to share the details of our divorce. So I went to visit them. Is it true that you're remarrying Emily? Yes, it's true. True. Emily, Emma, and I are going to start over as a family. What are you talking about? Your only family is Sarah. She's not my family anymore. John's words made his father frown with a look that seemed to say, "Give me a break." John shook his head a few times, then handed me a piece of paper. It was a bill from a nearby luxury hotel. What's this? It's the bill from the hotel we stayed at. John, acting as if it was obvious, pointed at the bill on the table, then suddenly collapsed. Oh, what the heck, Mom? I didn't raise you to be like this. My mother-in-law, gasping for breath, was met with a look of disbelief from John. Next to him, Emily wore the same expression. Why are you so angry? It's just that the family is changing because I'm getting married. Plus, you'll have a grandchild, a blood-related one at that. Aren't you happy? You two didn't. My mother-in-law, looking as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing, glanced at Emily, then turned her gaze to me. Both my in-laws understood that I didn't want children and still treated me as their own daughter. Of course, they treated Emily, my childhood friend, similarly. But there was always a boundary between a daughter-in-law and a friend. I remembered Emily often complaining about that. So I was certain my mother-in-law wouldn't be happy about this situation, and Emily should have known it too. You dote on Emma, right? It'll be your grandchild, so you'll be happy, right? It's because she's a child I've known since she was little. Oh, but half of her blood is from John, right? Even after all this, Emily, showing no sign of remorse and acting as if she couldn't understand the problem, gave me goosebumps. At that moment, someone who had been silent until now spoke up. Enough already. It's disgusting, huh? Emma, who had been playing with her smartphone in the corner of the room, spoke to Emily without looking up. The room fell into a stunned silence. My dad is the only one I consider my father, whether we're related by blood or not. He's the only one. But you know, John has always been the one to attend your school events. I heard everything from Dad, how he was always informed of the event dates after they were over, how eventually even the events themselves were kept from him. But Dad always said I was his daughter, so I am his daughter, and I will never be yours. Emma glared at Emily as she said this. Then, sitting beside me, she switched to a more concerned tone. You know, when I found out about this, I thought you would hate me. But Dad said that wasn't the case, so I came here today. Emma, I love you so much. You were so kind to visit me every day while I was in the hospital. I was really happy, Sarah. Emma, perhaps relieved of her anxiety, teared up and hugged me tightly. It might indeed be a child resulting from an affair between John and Emily. Yet it's a child I've taken care of for 15 years. There's no way I don't have affection for her. Speaking of which, Emily, weren't you curious why I wasn't surprised when I found out Emma is John's daughter? Ah! Emily looked startled. Before she could speak, a new person entered the room. We knew from the start, 10 years ago actually. George suddenly appeared. Understandably so, as she had recently unilaterally demanded a divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. I was shocked when you mentioned divorce. Oh, and unfortunately, you're not divorced yet. The divorce papers are still here. Didn't you notice? What? I figured it wasn't in Emily and John's nature to confirm things. But I couldn't help but be stunned that Emily, despite the 100-day waiting period for women to remarry, hadn't noticed for months. So, Emily is still my wife, and Emma is still my daughter. Well, since there won't be a wife though. Wait, what do you mean? A 15-year-old can choose their parent. That's not true. Emma wants to be with Mom, right? Emily said that and looked at Emma. Emma frowned at Emily and held my hand. Emily was speechless at that and glared at me. Then John suddenly burst into laughter. So that's what it is. You two are together, huh? But too bad. Isn't it impossible to live on George's salary alone? Can you stop making weird assumptions? Also, it seems George earns double the amount you think. Emily knows about it, huh? It's probably a bluff. A lol. Besides, it's impossible for you to work while dealing with your illness. You'll just die miserably somewhere. This time, I laughed at John's huge misunderstanding. John, seeing me suddenly start laughing, was getting frustrated. You didn't know about my income, did you, huh? It's probably just a bit more than a part-time job. No, it's different. My annual income is $500,000, huh? John's eyes and mouth were wide open in shock. Emily was also stunned. In fact, over the past 10 years, I had become a popular children's book author, and my income had skyrocketed from essays, interviews, and the like. Moreover, a film adaptation is planned soon, so my income is skyrocketing. Liar. Oh, do you want to see this? I said that and showed Emily my bank account screen. It clearly showed a large amount of money being deposited every month. Emily was at a loss for words when she saw it. Sarah, let's make up, huh? What are you saying? Emily was furious at John's words. Blinded by the money, I watched them blankly and then opened my mouth. Well, if you want to get married, feel free. Oh, and I'll definitely take the compensation for damages, Sarah. Wait, Sarah. Ignoring John's words, I took Emma's hand, and after saying goodbye to my in-laws, I left their house. John originally worked at my father-in-law's company, but it was revealed that he was lying about going out for sales, and he was fired. My father-in-law planned to forcibly put him on a friend's fishing boat and work him to the bone. Working on a fishing boat was tough for an indoor-loving John, and he contacted me several times. But each time, I notified my father-in-law, and eventually, the calls stopped. Emily lost custody to George and got divorced. She seemed uninterested in John, who couldn't afford luxuries and didn't seem to chase after him. She was disowned by her family and lived alone in a rundown apartment. She hadn't worked at all since getting married, and since she had always made others do things for her, she couldn't do anything herself. And there were hardly any places that would hire her as a full-time employee. Still, she had to pay for her living expenses and child support, so she worked multiple part-time jobs and barely made ends meet. After entering high school, Emma worked hard every day to study abroad and go to a prestigious university overseas. Being originally diligent, her dream is to translate my picture books and deliver them to children all over the world, which makes me happy. As for me, my picture books are selling well, and I am receiving more and more offers for anime adaptations and merchandise. My illness is also progressing well, and although I am still hospitalized, my doctor recently told me that I might be able to leave the hospital next year. And one more thing, George and Emma come to visit me every day. Actually, George recently confessed to me with remarriage in mind. I haven't given my answer yet, but I can't help but have feelings for him. He said he wants to live together when I leave the hospital. While thinking about what to answer, I work on my picture books every day, hoping for a happy future for us. I weave stories again today.
Finally, I don't have to see you anymore. You've been living here without paying, but now it's time for you to go. We've put up with your freeloading for too long. Okay, I get it. I'll go. Thanks for everything. I packed my things fast and left the house where I'd been living with my in-laws. I saw my mother-in-law smiling happily as I left. I chuckled to myself, putting on a sad face, but I knew what was coming for this house next. Hi, I'm Emily, 32 years old, and I work from home. I've been married to John for 5 years. We were happy together, but things changed in our 4th year of marriage. Suddenly, my father-in-law got sick, and we had to move in with my in-laws to take care of him. We thought it would only be temporary, but John's the only child. So we ended up staying longer to help out. I even thought about quitting my job to take care of him, but luckily, I could keep working from home. Living with my in-laws was chaotic at first, but then came some issues, especially with my mother-in-law. Emily, when are you going to start doing some housework? Get cleaning and cook dinner already. I'm not just lazing around, mother-in-law. What are you talking about? You're always on that computer, surfing the web. You must be goofing off instead of doing work. The idea that using a computer means wasting time is old-fashioned. I got special permission to work from home. I didn't want to waste the skills I've worked hard to get, so I balanced my job with taking care of the house and my father-in-law. It felt good when, after about 3 months of hard work, I managed to earn as much as before. I had to work extra hard because it was tough to manage on just John's income. I'm glad we'll finally have some extra money. I want to save up, I thought. But things got harder for some reason. It seemed like our savings were just going down. When I checked our spending, I realized John was spending a lot. And I found out my mother-in-law was spending a lot too. John has always liked to show off, often treating his coworkers to lunch. But lately, he's been using our credit card to throw big parties for them. Obviously, if you spend more than you earn, your savings will go down. As for my mother-in-law, she's picked up a bunch of expensive hobbies with her friends, spending money on classes and socializing without thinking twice. With both John and my mother-in-law piling chores and caregiving on me while spending recklessly, I reached my limit. I was covering all our expenses with my income and couldn't even think about saving money. It stressed me out, so I decided to talk to them. John, Mom, you've been spending a lot lately. We're going to run out of savings if we keep this up. Can you please cut back on spending? But they both pushed back strongly. You think I want my coworkers to see me as cheap? I have to treat them sometimes. It's okay to not always be the one treating, and they won't think you're cheap if you're not always throwing parties. I have to be considerate at work too, you know. It's one thing to treat your coworkers to lunch, but taking them to a bar on your tab? How does that have anything to do with work? You're just doing it for fun, right? And don't pretend you don't know. You come home drunk and brag about it. You're having way more fun than talking to your own mom. You see what I mean, right? Haha. I go to my classes too, to have fun with my friends. Are you saying I should just stay home? You're not being a good wife. You, who only know how to do housework, have no right to tell me what to do. Why is she acting so superior when all she does is stay at home? I work too, you know. I earn money and help with the household. I'm also taking care of your dad, not just doing chores. Stop lying. My mom takes care of Dad, and since you're not even going to the office, you're not making much, are you? Who do you think you are, acting all superior just because you work part-time? I was stunned, speechless. It seemed like they didn't understand that I was really working, taking care of the house and my father-in-law, all while earning money. And my mother-in-law seemed to have told John that she was the one looking after my father-in-law, making me seem lazy. I thought about leaving many times, but I stayed for my father-in-law. He's always been kind to me since I married John, always saying, "Emily, I'm sorry you have to put up with so much." Father-in-law, I don't mind taking care of you. What are you talking about? I feel bad needing care, but I feel worse about how your son and wife are treating you. They're taking advantage of you, aren't they? Well, yes, we couldn't make ends meet with just John's income. It's all thanks to your hard work that we're getting by. Father-in-law, you knew. It turned out my father-in-law had known about our household situation all along. Whenever he needed care, he'd thank me and speak kindly to me. I loved him dearly, so taking care of him wasn't a burden at all. But I worried about what would happen to him if I left. So I decided to look after him diligently until he passed away, which happened about a year later. At his funeral, I cried the whole time, grieving deeply for him. But my mother-in-law, without shedding a tear, coldly asked me why I was crying so much. It was clear she wasn't grieving like I was. So I replied, "My father-in-law has passed away. Of course I'm sad. I've been taking care of him all this time." Upon hearing my reply, my mother-in-law exploded with anger, as if I didn't take care of my husband at all. But the truth was, she hardly took care of him. Instead, she took advantage of me, avoiding both housework and caregiving by claiming she was too busy with her hobbies. Yet she always managed to find time to go out. She played the victim, pretending to cry in front of relatives. From the outside, it looked like I was the bad daughter-in-law. People would say, "Stop being so hard on your mother-in-law." Some even took her side and blamed me. I was just grieving my father-in-law's death, but even strangers blamed me, which made me furious. I chose to distance myself from our relatives. Then, John noticed me and approached to complain. "So you embarrassed my mom in front of our relatives, huh?" "What? I don't understand. I was just crying and grieving your dad's death. Then, your mom came out to me, making snide comments. That's all. I heard you were talking like she did nothing for my dad." "I didn't say that. I was just saying how sad I was that your dad, who I had been taking care of, passed away. Maybe it sounded like I was blaming your mom because she didn't do anything. But in reality, are you looking down on my mom?" "No, I'm just telling the truth. And if you're so upset, you should have helped me out. Don't you think you could have taken better care of your own dad?" "Why are you blaming me too? I'm not involved in this. You're his son. Didn't you feel any responsibility to take care of him?" "I had work. It was your job as a housewife to take care of him." "That's not fair. I have work too, so that doesn't make sense." Our argument got heated, and panicked relatives intervened to break it up. Though the argument stopped, my husband and I didn't speak for the rest of the day. Later, after handling all the funeral arrangements, a lawyer talked about the inheritance. "I'd like to discuss the will regarding the inheritance after your father-in-law's passing. It states that the family home and land will be given to his son John, while the remaining assets will be split equally between his wife and daughter-in-law, Emily." "What? Why would Emily get a share? I'm his wife. Shouldn't everything else be mine if John gets the house and land?" "Your husband wanted to acknowledge Emily's dedication to his care. He wished to leave her a portion of the inheritance as a gesture of gratitude. This was his decision, and it cannot be changed." "Ah, I understand now. So Emily was just looking after him for the inheritance." "Why would you think that?" "It must be. Why else would she dedicate herself to caregiving?" "I've had a good relationship with my father-in-law ever since we got married. I took care of him to repay his kindness. If you think it's impossible, why did you push the caregiving onto me?" "Mother-in-law, why would you belittle me like that? Don't talk nonsense." "I understand now, so let's just leave it at that." When the lawyer was there, my mother-in-law couldn't say anything rude, so she kept talking, looking annoyed. "He made that decision. Well, I suppose it's a way of saying thank you for taking care of him. There's no other explanation." Then the lawyer kept talking. "Can I go on? Your father-in-law wrote a note saying Emily doesn't have to look after him anymore." When the lawyer said that, my mother-in-law's face, which had been angry before, suddenly changed to a happy smile. "I got it. I get what it means now." "Oh, what do you mean?" My husband looked confused by his mom's sudden excitement. "It means Emily doesn't have to stay here anymore. Since she won't have to take care of my husband, the money split wasn't a thank you, it was just like a goodbye payment." My mother-in-law twisted my father-in-law's will based on her own ideas. She misunderstood it the way my father-in-law, and I wanted her to misunderstand it. Actually, before my father-in-law passed away, we talked about this. He wanted me to be free from this house after he died. He planned to trick my husband and mother-in-law with the will, so I could leave without any fuss. Just as my father-in-law planned, my mother-in-law, totally fooled, is trying to get rid of me. While hiding my true feelings, I acted shocked by the will, saying, "Oh, father, why would you do such a thing? See, even my husband doesn't see you as his precious daughter-in-law. John, you don't need Emily anymore, right? Just divorce her already." "John, you wouldn't suggest divorce, would you?" I looked at John with tears in my eyes. After a long pause, he finally said, "Yeah, it seems like the best choice. I've got the family property and Mom got the money. I won't have to worry about taking care of anyone in the future, and I won't have any issues with Emily." "What? I understand. That's how it is. I'm sorry, but could you please leave?" "Okay, I guess I don't belong here anymore." Feeling just as hurt, I took a paper from my drawer and handed it to my husband. It was something I had picked up during a past argument, the divorce papers. Without hesitation, he signed them. "Finally, I don't have to deal with you, a freeloader who doesn't contribute. Leave. Consider yourself lucky I tolerated you for this long." "I understand. I'll go now. Thank you for everything up until now. By the way, since the lawyer's here, I'd like to talk about..." "It's fine if there's no need for property division, right?" I've already received enough from my father-in-law's inheritance, and you know what, Emily? I've managed to support myself just fine. It would be greedy of me to ask for more. Well, you have a point. Okay, that settles it. Please leave this house as soon as you can. I hurriedly packed my things and left the home where I had lived. My mother-in-law watched me go with a gleeful expression, unaware of what was to come in that house. After leaving my in-laws' house, I wasted no time in submitting the divorce papers to City Hall. When I arrived at the apartment I had rented ahead of time, I couldn't contain my excitement as I shouted in the spacious room. Yes, I'm finally free at last. I couldn't help but let out a yell of joy. I was so relieved to be liberated from the painful married life. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to my father-in-law, who orchestrated my escape from that house. Since then, I've been enjoying a comfortable life on my own. While I had gotten used to working remotely at my in-laws' place, now that I've left, I have much more time to focus on my work. As a result, my income has increased, and I'm able to live a luxurious life without any disturbances. One day, I received a call from my ex-husband. John, it's been a while. What made you call? Emily, please, we're struggling. Can you help us out? Is this a joke? Weren't you the ones who kicked me out? Even though we're earning the same, we're barely making ends meet. We can't keep living like this. Oh, that sounds rough. I decided to lay it out straight. Well, that's because my salary isn't supporting the household anymore. What do you mean? Can't you see? You couldn't sustain your lifestyle just with your income, even though you were spending lavishly, and I couldn't afford our lifestyle on my own. Nonsense. You've always been wasting your salary on yourself. The only reason we managed was because of the money I was bringing in. At your ages, your spending habits, both you and your mother, are just ridiculous. What? So how much were you making, Emily? Let me think. It was around $4,800 a month back then, I think. You were making that much. Yes, I was. But you never knew, did you? By the way, now that I'm not held back, I'm making even more. Ha ha. Even over the phone, I could sense my ex-husband's surprise. Emily, what do you say we give living together another shot? Huh? Kicking you out was a mistake. We can start over, can't we? What are you saying? You're just interested in my money. No, it's not about that. I've realized I still love you, Emily. Don't be ridiculous. I have no interest in going back to you. By the way, what about the inheritance your mother got? You should still have plenty left from that, right? Well, it's almost gone. There's no way she got around $100,000, right? You couldn't have spent it all so quickly. We went shopping and took trips overseas. Plus, we lost almost half of it in casinos. Both of you are beyond help. I'm speechless. I'm a stranger now. I can't do anything about it, and I don't want to. But don't say such cold things. Help us. I don't care. I'm hanging up. Don't call me again. After ending the call, I promptly canceled my ex-husband's phone contract. I had no clue what happened to him and my ex-mother-in-law after losing all communication means. However, nearly a year later, as I passed by their house, I noticed it had been demolished. They must have had to let go of it due to financial troubles. But honestly, it wasn't my concern anymore. As for me, I decided to fill my newfound free time with a new hobby and started attending a wine class I'd been interested in. There, I met a man 2 years older than me who showed a keen interest in me. After a year and a half of dating, we tied the knot. He's a down-to-earth and kind-hearted man, making waves at a prestigious company and earning a good salary. He respects my work, and we share a happy married life built on mutual respect. Lately, I've been pondering if this newfound happiness was a gift from my father-in-law. It's like you're not wanted here. You should go. Even though my brother said mean things to me, my sister-in-law sitting next to me quietly squinted her eyes and smiled, enjoying my surprised face. When I looked at our mother, who I lived with for a long time, she sadly said, "Living with your brother and his wife, who went to a really good university and works at a top company, seems better than living with you, Linda. You always stay inside the house," she said calmly. My mother, sister-in-law, and brother didn't seem to realize how much I've helped with money and worked for our family. Even though it hurt, I said, "Okay, I'll go. Don't ask me for help again," and started packing my things. She watched me and sarcastically said with a smug smile, "Giving up so easily, Linda? But nobody knows who will have a harder time in the future. Ignoring this could cause problems." My name's Linda, and I've done really well with online businesses. My journey here was unexpected. Back in university, I thought I'd end up with a regular job at a typical company, but something changed everything during my second year. My dad got sick and needed someone to take care of him every day. My mom wasn't great at housework, so we hired caregivers. But they couldn't be there all the time, so my mom had to step in. Sometimes she ignored my dad's needs, telling him to wait. I had to help him out whenever this happened. Seeing this made me worry about the future. When I start working, who will take care of my dad? I couldn't rely on my mom alone. So I started looking into ways to make money from home. I studied online business stuff during university, using what I learned in economics. I teamed up with friends who knew about management and economics, and then with others who were good with computers. That's how we started our online business project. We had a nice office where staff could work if they found it hard to concentrate at home, or for new employees to learn the ropes. But personally, I hardly ever went there. My main workspace is at home, where I can be with my dad. I do most of my work there. One day, my dad asked me if I gave up on a full-time job for him, or if it was hard to find one after graduating. It made me emotional, but I explained how I've been running my online business since college. It's doing well, and I can work from home without any problems. My dad was proud of me and grateful for what I do. He said I've become a responsible adult, which meant a lot to me. I'm actually not the only child responsible for taking care of my father. I have an older brother named Tom, who's 2 years older than me. Tom tends to be selfish and doesn't often think about others. He's always been really smart and did great in school. After he graduated from a top university, he easily got a job at a really good company. When we found out about his job, we were surprised but happy for him. We all tried to reach out to congratulate him, but his response wasn't what we expected. He said he was starting a new life in the city and didn't plan to come back home. He wanted us to believe he was doing well on his own. Then he hung up the phone abruptly. Since that day, we couldn't get in touch with Tom at all. He cut off all communication with us, ignoring our calls and messages. Even though our dad had supported him financially through college and living on his own, Tom never seemed grateful and distanced himself from us. Both my dad and I felt shocked and disappointed by his behavior. We started to wonder if our mom was secretly talking to Tom. But even with Dad's health getting worse and needing care every day, Tom's complete silence showed he didn't care about his responsibilities as part of the family. Then one day, we got some unexpected news from Mom. Tom called me out of the blue. He said he's thinking of marrying someone and asked if we could give them a wedding gift. He wants $99,000. Mom told Dad and me about this, looking a bit worried because of our finances. Mom mostly stays home except for her part-time job 3 days a week. She usually spends her salary on lunch and shopping with friends, so she doesn't save much. I was surprised that Mom wanted to give Tom so much money, especially since we hadn't heard from him in a long time. Dad was first calm but then got really mad. Why should we give him all that money when he hasn't even talked to us since he left home? He was upset with Mom, who looked unhappy and glanced at me for support. Mom tried to explain, but think about it, Tom's getting married. I want him to have a good life and maybe even give us grandchildren. It's what parents want. Please understand, she said calmly. The main reason I didn't go for a regular job was because of Mom, so it hurt to hear her say those things. Dad was also upset with Mom. Linda stays home to take care of me because you didn't help enough. I've supported Tom a lot, but he's never thanked me. How can you ask for such a big gift for him? That day, there were loud arguments between Mom and Dad. I listened from the next room, worried about Dad's health. Mom always favored my brother and praised him, but she didn't understand why I stayed home to care for Dad. It made me really sad. After Mom left to go out for dinner, Dad said to me, "Linda, thank you for always being here for me." "It's okay, Dad. I've known for a long time that Mom favors Tom. I'm used to it. I know I've asked a lot of you. I wish I could do more to help you. Dad, you've done so much for me. You've supported my education and always encouraged me. If it wasn't for you, I might not have started my online business." My father's smile brought me some comfort. But I couldn't understand why Mom, who had such a caring father, acted so selfishly. And my brother, who hadn't talked to us for years, suddenly asking for a big wedding gift was hard to swallow. But the most shocking thing happened shortly after. One morning, I found my father wasn't moving. I called an ambulance, but it was too late. He had passed away. Many people came to his funeral to pay their respects, showing how lucky he was. Normally, the wife would arrange the funeral, but Mom said she was too busy and left it all to me. She was always on her phone, seeming more concerned about that than about Dad's passing. I felt angry and unsupported. I focused on arranging the funeral to give Dad a proper send-off. Then something surprising happened. My brother showed up at the funeral with a woman in a flashy dress. He was dressed casually, which wasn't right for the occasion. Everyone was shocked, but Mom greeted him with a smile. "I'm glad you're here, Tom. Now your father's inheritance will be ours," Mom boldly stated. The atmosphere in the hall changed completely after Mom's sudden statement. Everyone was shocked and confused. Honestly, I don't think Linda should expect any inheritance. She's been at home taking care of Dad, Tom said loudly with a hint of sarcasm. I was surprised and sighed deeply. He must have known about our family situation and Dad's help from Mom. But Mom seemed to ignore the fact that I contributed a lot to our family's finances and whether there was actually any inheritance from Dad, who needed care. Dad used to have a good job, but making such comments at a funeral was disrespectful. The funeral felt gloomy and tense. "Should we leave now, Tom? We'll get the inheritance anyway," Mom said, pulling on his arm. As soon as I saw the woman with my brother, I knew she was his wife. She had a similar vibe to Tom, and I figured she must have a personality like his to marry him. I wish they would leave soon. Surprisingly, even Mom seemed to agree with them. "Shall we go get sushi?" she said, and the three of them left. Other relatives were also surprised. Some spoke out in shock, but I suggested, "Let's stay composed for Dad's sake." I kept my irritation to myself and carried on with the funeral. Returning home, I found a messy dining table with 3 boxes of sushi, likely ordered for delivery. From the living room came the sound of voices and laughter. Mom, Tom, and his wife Jessica were having a good time, drinking. "Hey, you're late, Linda. Can you make some snacks and grab more alcohol?" my brother asked. I was shocked by their insensitivity, especially during Dad's funeral. It seemed they didn't realize their behavior was wrong, even with the shocked looks from other relatives. Mom, who should have corrected them, was joining in their laughter, making me feel justified in staying. I wondered if they would have even bothered with a proper funeral if I wasn't there. So I told them, "There's no inheritance for you." I refused to get more drinks or snacks for them. Tom, now drunk, got upset. "What do you mean, Linda? You've always been at home, causing trouble for Dad. It's only fair we use his assets." Considering that Tom relied on Dad for all his college expenses, I couldn't understand why he felt entitled to Dad's assets. It frustrated me to see him act like he didn't owe Dad anything. "Isn't this house Dad's?" Tom asked. "As the eldest son, it should be mine. Why is Linda, who does nothing all day, living here?" Mom and Tom seemed to agree. The warmth Mom used to have for me was gone. "This house is mine," Tom said firmly. "I want Linda out." His wife didn't seem bothered by this. Mom spoke next. "I feel more comfortable living with my son and his wife, who have done well in life, than with you, Linda." They didn't realize how much I contributed to the house. I felt sad and disappointed. I sighed and decided to speak up. "I'll leave. Please don't ask anything of me anymore." As I packed my things in my room, I heard my sister-in-law mocking me. "She's really poor, don't you think?" They all laughed at me, but I just smiled bitterly to myself. Yes, right now, I might seem like the most miserable one. But there's something they don't know. This house has been legally mine since Dad was alive. He entrusted it to me. Even though Mom still lives here and might say she spent most of her life here, legally, it's mine. However, seeing her cold behavior during Dad's funeral made me think about what to do with the house. I felt tired of our relationship and saw her presence as a burden. Living alone in this big house would be lonely, and maintaining it would be hard, so I decided to sell it. Seeing Mom and my brother's family enjoying my situation without knowing my decision made me feel pity for them. Expecting inheritance from Dad seems ridiculous to me. Before my mom got sick, she had a stable income. But when her health declined, she couldn't work anymore. So she used her savings to hire someone to help her every day. She spent her savings on daily expenses, and even when Dad got sick and needed more care, Mom kept spending like usual, so her savings dwindled. When I realized Dad's savings were gone, I started giving $3,000 each month to help with household expenses. Mom did the housework but wasn't good at managing money. When Mom went shopping, she often bought expensive things impulsively, even if we didn't need them. She didn't pay attention to sales or budgeting. She used the money she earned from her part-time job for her hobbies and fun stuff. She also took more money than needed for daily expenses to enjoy herself. Dad felt bad about it. In the end, the money he saved was spent by Mom. As I prepared to leave the house, I withdrew all the money I had been giving for household expenses. I couldn't bear to let my mom keep using it. The next day, something unexpected happened. "Did you take the household money, Linda?" Mom's voice came through the phone one quiet morning. She sounded surprised and a bit upset. "Mom, what household money?" "Dad's savings. Those were all gone when I checked." "Did you forget that you used them up?" I left the ledger on the table. "It shows how you kept taking money from Dad's savings." Dad knew about it too. After his savings ran out, I was the one giving $3,000 every month to support the house. I heard Mom rushing around, probably looking for the ledger I mentioned. Then I heard the living room door open. "Mom, what's going on? Wasn't there supposed to be inheritance after Dad passed? Did you use it all?" My brother sounded angry and disappointed. His wife's voice echoed in the background. "I can't believe this, Mom. Did you really call us back home expecting us to support you financially? That's really harsh." "No, that's not what I meant." It was clear Mom had called them back because of the inheritance. Hearing this, I knew they wouldn't trust her anymore. "We left our stable jobs to come here, expecting to get Dad's inheritance. How are we supposed to live now?" "What, Tom? I didn't know you made such a big decision." This was all news to me too. My brother used to have a good job, but I wasn't really bothered by their decision because it didn't affect me directly. "And what about the $2,700 you've been getting every month?" my brother asked. "Mom, you kept saying Linda wasn't working, right?" Mom suddenly looked at me with shock and guilt. "What? Linda? What's going on?" she asked. I smiled a little and said, "You should look into remote work. These days, you can have a job without leaving home." I never told them about my successful online business. I knew if they knew, they'd start relying on me. Worse, they might interfere with my business. "Please come back. Let's be a family again." Mom's voice was small, as if she hadn't blamed me at all. But I had no intention of going back. "Mom, you just want to rely on my money, right? And about the house. While Dad was alive, I took over ownership because of the property taxes. It's mine now. I don't plan to live there anymore, so I asked my uncle, who runs a real estate agency, to sell it. He was really mad about what happened at Dad's funeral, so if my brother and his family stay there, he'll kick them out. Losing our home was something I never imagined. Mom sounded shocked, and I could hear my brother's voice on the phone asking, "What's going on?" Feeling too overwhelmed to answer my brother's question, I decided to leave everything to Uncle. He promised to handle things and explain everything to Mom and my brother's family, so I trusted him. "Goodbye. I'm cutting ties with you and Mom. I won't be using this phone anymore. Farewell." With that, I ended the call. I imagined their surprise and felt a brief sadness. It would be hard for them to find me. I had plans to move abroad, a dream I never shared, not even with Dad. I always wanted to live in a warm, tropical country with a diverse culture. When Mom and my brother's family asked me to leave the house after Dad died, I saw it as the perfect chance to make my dream come true. After being evicted from the house, I immediately started packing and searching for a place abroad. I wanted somewhere quiet near the beach, so I focused on finding the perfect spot. Now I'm living alone in a short-term rental apartment close to the city center with good transportation links, which is great for getting ready for my move abroad. With my brother, his wife, and Mom busy looking for a new place to live after the eviction, they probably haven't had time to think about me. By the time I heard they were cramped in a small apartment, taking up part-time jobs to get by, I was already settling into my new life abroad. My uncle hired a detective agency to discreetly monitor them. They found out my family was struggling financially, still spending beyond their means and even borrowing money from risky lenders. If things continue like this, they might face even more trouble with debt collectors. I've cut ties with them and avoided getting involved. It's unlikely I'll ever see them again after everything that's happened.
After the funeral of my father, a highly respected major shareholder in the company, our family convened to discuss the inheritance. In the meeting, my brother-in-law, Jason, unexpectedly asserted his opinion. He argued fervently that my wife, Emily, the eldest daughter, should inherit the stocks and a total of $5 million. Witnessing my brother-in-law and sister eagerly anticipating a substantial windfall, the lawyer calmly interjected with a hint of surprise. As the lawyer explained, Emily legally had no claim to the inheritance. My name is John, a 42-year-old salaried worker living with my beloved wife and 2 children. Despite my father's impressive reputation, my elder sister, Emily, has long been a source of concern for our parents due to her recurring problematic behaviors. She struggled to establish a stable career and led a self-centered life, causing me to distance myself. Over time, my discomfort grew, particularly when Emily, at the age of 50, abruptly brought home a much younger man named Alex and announced her intention to marry him. Despite Alex's attractive appearance, he exuded an irresponsible air that did not sit well with me. Emily shamelessly sought wedding funds from our father, quickly squandering them. Her audacious demand for more funds further distressed our father, who faced health issues. Eventually, our father succumbed to an illness, leaving us grieving his sudden demise. I took charge of the funeral arrangements while my sister, true to form, distanced herself and refused to contribute. In the aftermath of the funeral, as my mother and I were still grappling with our grief, the lawyer arrived to discuss the inheritance. To our surprise, Jason and Emily barged into the discussion, claiming that Emily, as the eldest daughter, was entitled to the stocks and a $5 million inheritance. Jason's triumphant demeanor shocked us, and he boldly asserted that we should not think about using the funds as we pleased. Both my mother and I were bewildered, having been unaware of the will left by our father. As Jason reveled in the prospect of newfound wealth, Emily, dissatisfied, questioned the lawyer's statement. However, the lawyer clarified that Emily had no legal right to the inheritance. This revelation left both my sister and brother-in-law with astonished expressions. Emily, displaying her anger, raised her voice, insisting that it was impossible. The lawyer further disclosed that Emily was not the biological daughter of the deceased. Emily turned to our mother with an intense gaze, seeking confirmation. At that moment, my mother wore a complex expression, seemingly unable to find the words to address the shocking revelation. I had always been aware that Emily and our father were not biologically related, but it appeared she was completely oblivious to this fact. Confused, Emily began shaking our mother's shoulders, pleading desperately, "Mom, what does this mean?" Unperturbed by the shaking, my mother calmly yet firmly revealed, "Emily, you are the daughter of my previous husband." While being shaken, my mother quietly disclosed this significant fact. Emily, who had always asserted that our dad loved her the most, now wore a face of utter disbelief. Suddenly, Jason interjected. "But if there was an adoption, she would have rights to the inheritance, right? That's correct, isn't it, Emily?" He sought confirmation from my sister, who hesitantly agreed, saying, "Yes, that should be the case." However, in front of Emily, our mother slowly shook her head, saying, "No. Emily, we never went through an adoption." Emily, shaking with anger, cried out, "How could this be? I am the rightful eldest daughter of this family. Dad even said so," glaring at me with rage. In a trembling voice, Emily continued, "Why do you get to monopolize our family's wealth?" Her words sparked my anger, and I retorted, "Have you ever thought about how much you made Dad spend? You still have something to say," I said indignantly. "Shut up. I am the daughter of this house. I have every right to it," Emily insisted. I replied, exactly. Spending money on a daughter is a parent's duty. I was appalled by the situation and let out a deep sigh. Normally, spending money on a daughter isn't wrong, but the issue was the amount my sister made Dad spend on her debts and compensations. The lawyer, who had been observing quietly, spoke up. How about we let Emily see the will too? Emily was clueless about the will, and when I pointed out that Dad wanted to discuss its contents with the whole family, she had neglected it and went out for other errands. Jason couldn't hide his anger and glared at Emily, asking, "Why did you do that, Emily?" It was important. At the lawyer's suggestion, my sister and brother-in-law agreed to hear the will. The lawyer then read aloud Dad's will, which clearly named my mother and me as the sole inheritors of the entire estate. The will detailed specific reasons why Emily was not legally adopted. It seemed Dad initially intended to accept Emily as a formal family member. However, the will meticulously described his disappointment in her mean actions towards me since childhood and her escalating wastefulness as she grew older. Emily was shocked and lost for words, confronted with the reality of having no inheritance rights. "What does this mean, Emily? Were you deceiving me, making me believe we'd become rich?" I asked. Left behind, Emily glared at us with a face full of anger, questioning my mother. "Why didn't you adopt me? Why does Mom get the inheritance?" I had always been aware that Emily and our father were not biologically related, but it appeared that she was completely oblivious to this fact. Confused, Emily began shaking our mother's shoulders, pleading in a desperate voice, "Mom, what does this mean?" Unperturbed by the shaking, my mother calmly yet firmly replied, "Emily, you are the daughter of my previous husband." While being shaken, she quietly disclosed this significant fact. Emily, who had always taunted me with claims that Dad loved her the most, now wore a face of utter disbelief. Suddenly, Jason interjected, "But if there was an adoption, she would have rights to the inheritance, right?" "That's correct, isn't it, Emily?" Seeking confirmation from my sister. "Yes, that should be the case," Emily replied. However, in front of Emily, our mother slowly shook her head. "No, Emily, we never went through an adoption." Shocked by this revelation, Emily turned to our mother, demanding an explanation. At that moment, my mother wore a complex expression, seemingly unable to find the words to address the shocking disclosure. "I should have rights too. It's unfair because of Mom's lack of action," Emily exclaimed, her cries filled with frustration. My mother, struggling to find words, managed to say, "Well, that is why." "Why deviate everything? Why nothing for me?" Emily shouted angrily, her disheveled hair emphasizing her intense emotions. The lawyer, however, remained calm, as if it were a normal day. As soon as I asserted my biological connection with Dad, Emily, in a fit of rage, reached out to hit me, expressing that it would have been better if I never existed. Before I could respond, the lawyer intervened, warning Emily to refrain from such actions, threatening to involve the police. About half a year later, the inheritance process was smoothly completed. Emily and Jason initially resisted strongly, but the lawyer's skillful handling left them with little room to interfere. My mother eventually provided Emily with a small amount of money, though it wasn't my place to comment on it. Frustratingly, Emily and Jason disappeared without a trace, leaving our relatives in shock and disappointment due to their blatant greed for money. One day, my wife suggested taking my mother and daughter out for a pleasant meal. Despite my proposal for my mother to live with us, she hesitated, torn by the irreplaceable bond with Emily. Understanding her concerns, I gave my mother some time to think. As I drove her home, we were surprised to see lights on at the usually empty house. Cautiously parking the car in the garage, we approached the entrance, suspecting Emily might have returned. Suddenly, a car rushed towards us, and my daughter yelled, "Watch out!" Instinctively, I threw myself to protect my wife, barely avoiding the car. Though I groaned in pain after being grazed by the car, my wife, worried, asked if I was okay. The car, driven by Jason, eventually crashed into the garage entrance. During my overnight stay at the hospital, Emily visited with my mother. While my mother tended to flowers, Emily looked at me and remarked, "You're surprisingly tough, aren't you?" Her tone carried a hint of disappointment. I pondered to myself, confirming my suspicions, and provocatively responded that if I had perished in the accident, Mom would have inherited everything. Disappointed by my words, Emily looked visibly uneasy. "I know what you were expecting," I continued as Emily averted her eyes, looking down. "But you see, Mom intends to renounce her inheritance, so your hopes won't come to fruition." As I uttered this, Emily stared back at me in astonishment. It seemed unfathomable to her that someone would willingly relinquish what they could receive. "I have a wife and kids, so Mom says the inheritance should go to them. That's what a parent should do," I explained, anticipating Emily's objections. But Emily started to object, her words trailing off. "I've made a will early, following Dad's example. Unfortunately, the inheritance that I should have will no longer go to Mom," I added. At these words, Emily shivered, unable to hide her agitation. Unable to conceal her anger, Emily raised her voice, demanding a share of the $5 million inheritance. When I firmly refused, Emily, filled with rage, grabbed my collar, insisting I should give her at least half since she was my real sister. Despite her loud pleas, I looked at her with sympathy. Such greed is what disappointed Dad. "Don't you understand that?" I spoke calmly. Emily's face rapidly turned red, and she reached for my throat. At that moment, my mother returned to the room and yelled at Emily, asking what she was doing. Hearing her shout, the nurses, summoned by the nurse call, escorted Emily out of the room. Though my mother seemed to try to protect Emily, she left, showering her with cold words. "Where did I go wrong in raising her?" my mother murmured in a pained voice. Soon after, we discovered that my mother had fallen ill. Pained by her weakening state, we started helping with transportation and housework. This, apparently, infuriated Emily, who probably heard it from our mother or encountered my wife when she came to ask for money. One day, out of the blue, Emily contacted me on my cell phone, stating that they would take care of Mom from now on, and I didn't need to come anymore. Confused, I asked her to explain the sudden decision, expressing deep concerns about leaving Mom's care to Emily, who could hardly manage household chores, let alone care for a sick person. I hurriedly called Mom to understand the situation, and surprisingly, I learned that Jason had caregiving experience, and Mom claimed her life wasn't much disrupted at the moment. I felt a sense of relief upon learning that, but soon after, Mom was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance due to a medication dosage mistake. The family hurried to the hospital, where we found Mom severely weakened. I asked my wife to stay with her and rushed to our family home. Upon arriving, I discovered the house in disarray. Mom couldn't prepare her favorite meals, the fridge was empty, and Emily had fired the helper without consulting anyone. Any expectations I had of Emily quickly turned to disappointment. Checking the safe, I found a significant amount of money had been withdrawn from Mom's bank account. Fortunately, the inheritance account was untouched, but the funds set aside for daily expenses were nearly depleted. Swiftly gathering necessary items such as bank books, cards, and seals, I returned to the hospital to explain everything to Mom and discuss our next steps. Emily, unaware of the bank book issue, was shocked, but her reaction darkened when I mentioned the medication mistake was something Jay had prepared. I suggested to Mom that it would be better not to let Emily into the house anymore, expressing my concerns about the house's terrible state and Mom's apparent weight loss. I warmly suggested that we live together in a new house. Mom burst into tears at these words, crying intensely. However, Mom's condition worsened, and despite the doctor's best efforts, she passed away heartbroken over Emily's actions. When I returned to the family home to prepare for Mom's funeral, I discovered that all the valuables were gone. It appeared that Emily and her financially struggling husband had taken them. Seeing the empty house filled me with shock and anger, and I resolved firmly to make things right. The day after Mom's funeral, I met with Emily and the lawyer at the law office to discuss the inheritance. Emily, filled with a sense of superiority, confidently declared her right to receive Mom's inheritance. Unable to contain my laughter at her misunderstanding, the lawyer solemnly announced, "Let's take a look at the will," and broke the seal. Emily's face drained of color when the contents revealed that she was not to inherit anything. Jason, showing his fury, demanded an explanation. "What does that mean? She's her daughter. You can't trick us. Hand over the inheritance now." Jason, shaking with anger, pounded the table. I calmly questioned him. "Jason, did you do something to Mom?" "I did no such thing," he retorted dismissively. "Then why was the usual medication mistaken?" I pressed, but Jason brushed it off, saying, "That's irrelevant, John. It's impossible that I don't get any inheritance. What did you do? I can't pay the mortgage for my apartment now." Shocked by his words, I realized that Emily had been counting her chickens before they hatched. Even though she hadn't appeared immediately after hearing of our mother's death, Emily, unable to hide her desperation, pressed the lawyer, "Is there really nothing?" The lawyer sighed deeply and confirmed, "Yes, the will is as it states." Explaining the legal aspects, he revealed that after deducting the amounts Emily had withdrawn and sold off without permission, the inheritance was practically non-existent. In reality, this situation was part of a plan I had discussed with the lawyer beforehand. Emily, astonished, protested vehemently, refusing to accept reality. She expressed her dissatisfaction, but I harbored strong resentment towards Emily, who only leeched off others without working. Just to take the money when Mom was delighted, believing that Emily would take care of her. Caring for someone requires money. "You wouldn't understand that," I lashed out. At my demand to see the expenditure details Emily had used for Mom, she trembled, realizing there were no receipts to acknowledge those claims. Jason tried to sway the situation in his favor, but I refused his request, openly admitting the mistreatment I had endured from Emily. I stated firmly, "I'll be taking legal action regarding that accident." Taken aback, Jason turned pale, realizing his slip. I explained that we had gained consent for recording the meeting in advance. Emily cried out in agony, realizing the consequences of their actions. As a result, Jason faced legal consequences, and his past misconducts were uncovered, leading to his arrest. Though Emily appeared to be a minor accomplice, she faced financial troubles and rejection from relatives. Meanwhile, I continued my days of steady work, unshaken by the ordeal, and looked forward to small joys from stock dividends.